face and, you know, the related issues of addiction and mental health. And so there was an ongoing series of protests out here at the Wayne Morse Free Speech Plaza. There were a few different iterations of curfews or emergencies that were declared to close the plaza. And in one of those instances, I was never really a participant in any of those protests, but I was just so offended at the idea that the Free Speech Plaza would be closed under the guise of an emergency that, you know, I came that day in 2013 and chose to be voluntarily arrested and spend the night in the Lane County Jail for what actually isn't an arrestable offense, but that was never resolved. And I chose to fight it all the way to the Court of Appeals and lost, just because I really wanted to challenge the concept that using the emergency power of the Board of Commissioners, a permanent curfew could just be put over the Free Speech Plaza. I can think of a whole number of legitimate protest reasons that activists that I know of would still like to engage in there, even as simple as just having a shift of people maintaining a vigil with a sign or a flag, but maintaining a 24-hour presence to demonstrate their commitment to their cause, or just the fact that, you know, some people work during the day, and if it would be a bizarre time to, like, you know, have a sign in the middle of the night out in the plaza, but it's a free speech plaza. And so I totally understand the nuance of the county regulating its spaces, and it totally makes sense to have limitations on parking lots and how they're used and at what times of day. I get that. I get about being disruptive or disrespectful to other people using the Free Speech Plaza or storing your personal belongings, or all sorts of other reasons that we might have to structure how that space is used. But I still believe that it's totally inappropriate to have a curfew on the Free Speech Plaza. That's like saying there's a curfew on the First Amendment rights of the people of Lane County. And I think that there are other ways that this board could structure the use of that space that don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of the rights of the people to express their First Amendment opinions out there on the plaza. And that doesn't just mean speech, but it means right to peaceably assemble, and it means the right to petition for redress of grievances. And so I hope that this new board will consider lifting that curfew on the Free Speech Plaza, because it's really repugnant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, James Houston. Please come forward, give your name and address, and our vice chair will set the timer at 3 minutes.
Morning. Dr. James Houston, Senior Citizens Advocate. I live in North Eugene. Not quite sure which ward. Senate Bill 608, Oregon's recent statewide rent control law, is not a panacea for some. Its 10% annual cap on rent increases harms those who need it most: senior citizens, the disabled, and those in the lowest socioeconomic strata, such as single-parent families and students saddled with student debt. Though well-intended, it only exacerbates our homeless problem and does not go far enough. Homelessness must first be tackled by preventing more of it, not creating additional victims. Wisdom dictates that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Recent data indicates that in our community, 51% of our citizens rent their shelter. We must go further to stop the implosion of homelessness in our community and state. ORS 91.225, the local rent control prohibition, stands in the way of a much-needed antidote. It prohibits cities and counties from enacting their own rent control measures that are urgently needed to address the factors that each community is wrestling with. That at the core is affordable housing. ORS 91.225 must be repealed. This can be done through a referendum that takes it out of the influential power special interest groups possess that can sway politicians, such as what happened with SB 608. A referendum lets the people speak on matters of grave importance that impact many lives. It takes 50,000 signatures of registered voters to get it accomplished. This could be an easy thing to organize and accomplish. I am here this morning asking you to issue a proclamation supporting such an endeavor. It could very well lead the way for other communities doing the same. I'm certain it can be done and appear on the 2020 ballot. This is synonymous to the 10th Amendment, where it states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively and to the people." Lead the way, show courage, show your support for we the people. Let Oregon go one step further by showing compassion and finding common sense solutions to the growing epidemic of homelessness and despair. Capitalism has found in Keynesian theory no longer exists. It is not based in reality when 90% of the wealth is in the hands of 1%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next up is Rob Dickinson.
Oops, sorry.
I get an extra 19 seconds. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Rob Dickinson. I'm from unincorporated Cottage Grove, and I'm here today regarding the selection process for the coordinated care organizations for Lane County. I'm here on behalf of South Lane Mental Health. I'm the board chair, and I'm representing the executive committee of the board. I will read from a letter that I have copies for the commissioners. South Lane Mental Health believes it to be in the best interest of our clients and our communities that there be a nonprofit coordinated care organization chosen as the CCO for Lane County or as one of the CCOs chosen. At this point, we lack sufficient information on the design and implementation for how multiple CCOs could operate simultaneously within Lane County and are taking no position on that until we have a more clear analysis of the implications for client care, access to services, economic and financial impacts, community benefits, and much more. Having multiple CCOs in Lane County could dramatically alter the service delivery landscape in ways that we can't predict at this time, and we would want a more detailed analysis of all the possible consequences before a decision was made on this. We think that the biggest consideration in the determination for Lane County, in the CCO determination for Lane County, is whether or not the CCO or CCOs are nonprofit organizations. It is our position that a CCO organized for the purpose of making it a profit can lead to compromises that are not in the best interest of clients or the community. When a client legitimately requires a higher level of care, that increased care is in conflict with the desire to control costs and increase profitability. Furthermore, we believe that a for-profit model for CCOs is less aligned with South Lane Mental Health's philosophy for client care, where we strive to provide the best possible community-based care and to serve clients in the manner that is best suited for them, regardless of whether it makes our job harder or more expensive. As an agency serving rural communities, we realize that we need to meet clients where they are, and that is not always the cheapest or the most convenient model to deliver. It is our opinion that a nonprofit CCO is more likely to be aligned with our mission to serve the community in this manner. And I'll provide copies of my letter. On a separate note, unrelated to the South Lane Mental Health Coordinated Care position, I just want to thank the commissioners for holding an evening work session or evening meeting tonight. I think that is much more in the interest of the public to have access to these meetings, to be able to come and deliver their feedback. So if this item weren't on the agenda for the morning, I would have come in the evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who has not signed up for public comment who wishes to give public comment? Okay. Thank you. So I think we are now ready to move to our next item, which is Commissioner's response to public comments and other issues. And I'll just note that we have tried to make a slight change on our agenda today, and that is we've tried to list the time that the board has on a particular item versus the time that staff has on a particular item. So this item, of course, is just the commissioners, so we estimate 10 minutes or approximately 2 minutes per commissioner. And then you'll see that we have our auditor coming, performance auditor coming pretty soon, and we have that listed as a 5-minute item for presentation, a 10-minute item for the board. So that's to give a little cue to the commissioners on what we've allocated in terms of time. Obviously, it's always up to the board as to whether we want to adjust that upward or downward. So at this time, I will call for commissioners if they wish to make a remonstrance. Are there any commissioners who want to? Okay. Commissioner Farr, go ahead.
Not a remonstrance, but other items. You know, Seattle is dying, right? All seen the documentary on Seattle is dying, and if you watch that, it produces some pretty alarming graphics and statements regarding what is happening in Seattle, and blames it on homelessness, or blames homelessness on it as kind of a continuum that they talk about, and a lot of negative responses about what is causing homelessness and what homelessness is causing in Seattle. And I had a nice long chat with a number of people about that and comparing what is happening in Lane County to what is happening in Seattle. And really, quite frankly, a lot of the things that are talked about in Seattle are the things that really are affecting us here in Lane County. Not the least of which is something that we're working on very extensively, and that is behavioral health issues, which include mental health and include substance use. Many of the folks that we see who are forced into homelessness or remain in homelessness are doing so because of mental health or behavioral health issues, which are related sometimes to, and quite often, to substance use. So for the folks who think that Lane County is dying, we are of a size that we're able to commit resources in ways that perhaps a city the size of Seattle or a county the size of King County can't really focus on. Just a couple of things I'll mention is we have a frequent user system engagement, which allows us to identify the people who are using emergency systems the most and find ways to put them into supportive housing. Supportive housing is the key. We also have a project Operation 600, which is building supportive housing. So finding ways to provide residential services for people who are suffering from substance use and behavioral health, mental health issues is one of the keys to making best use of our resources. Along those lines, I'm going to mention an article I was just reading. It's called "A New Task Force on Homelessness." A new task force will begin its work in Eugene. It'll be called the Homeless Action Task Force, and we'll take a new look at the conditions and issues surrounding homelessness in Eugene. It's a new force with an old task: identify why people are homeless in Eugene and what we're going to do to address it. Now, this new task force on homelessness began its work on December 28th, 2011, which is when that was written, 8 years ago. So are we kicking the can down the road? Are we creating new task forces on homelessness to figure out what it is that we need to do? We're not. We are identifying problems. We're making headway on those problems, particularly identifying why people are homeless and finding ways to provide residential services to keep people from chronic homelessness and from ongoing homelessness. A lot of work to do. Thank you.
Okay, any other remonstrances? Okay.
I'll just take a minute. I appreciate the three folks that came to speak this morning. I'm also looking forward to seeing who comes out in the evening to speak. But I, in particular, wanted to thank South Lane Mental Health for coming to speak in front of the board. I think that's really important that you bring your presence here and tell us your thoughts on situations that really affect you and the county in general. That's a good perspective for us to have. We are aware that the Oregon Health Authority ultimately makes the decisions on CCOs. We have written a letter to them as a board with some thoughts on how to go about maybe choosing how many are going to be serving the county, but we don't know what their decision will ultimately be, and we'll continue to monitor that.
Okay, anything further? Commissioner?
Thank you, and I just want to thank Commissioner Farr for pointing out the Seattle is Dying video. I think it's good information for anyone that wants to watch it, and it'll probably win national awards, if not more. I don't feel like they blame all the problems on the homeless as much as how they're dealing with the homeless situation and how it needs to be dealt with differently in a way that provides the treatment and accountability for that population, particularly the folks that are addicted. And it points to one solution about medically assisted treatment for those folks on opioid addiction, which is something we're doing here in Lane County. They went all the way to Rhode Island to look at their program there when they could have just come south to Lane County and talked to our treatment court folks about our medically assisted treatment program that's tied to our veterans court and our drug court. So it's interesting the solution they kind of point to in the last 20 minutes of the video we're doing right here in Lane County. Secondly, this is kind of not remonstrance, but Chair, a couple people walked in that looked like they wanted to give public comment, and I know there was a pretty bad traffic tie-up down there at the Washington Jefferson 7th today. Maybe you might want to go back to public comment, see if we can pick those people up.
Okay, good. Yep. Why don't we finish these remonstrances, and then we'll take your public comment, okay? All right. Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for allowing me to do this during the round, too. I would like to say that I appreciate the perspective of the presenters this morning. I think that minority opinion is often the most important opinion in a democracy, because otherwise you have what's called a tyranny of the majority, and I appreciate that very much. And it was heard, you know. Housing is such an interesting issue to me. I have one child that's looking at moving for a job in the Bay Area and isn't, because he found out that housing there for a decent place in San Francisco would cost $6,000 a month to rent. Just as a perspective of what's going on. If he moved east of the Bay to Oakland, he'd be down to $4,200 a month rent for a little place. I think that this issue, the gentleman mentioned Keynesian economics, there's fiscal policies, there's monetary policies, there's demand issues, there's supply issues. You know, there's such a host of things. And for me, one of the frustrations that this demonstrates, which so many issues do, is that we're trying to tackle this, and really we're at the bottom of the food chain as it relates to federal policy, state policy, what resources are available, and how do we patch an untenable situation together when, in fact, the untenableness of it tends to pit people that really have similar interests and ought to be working together against one another. And so I value everything that was said, and just like my diabetes, we're still searching for a cure. And those are the only points I wanted to make. I appreciated it very much. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go back to our public comment, and I'll do my remonstrance after the public comment. So why don't you come forward? And it doesn't really matter which one goes first, but one of you can sit down while the other one gives your public comment. Right there would be great. And what we usually do is we have a 3-minute public comment period. So I'll ask you to give your name and where you live, and then our vice chair will turn on the timer there, and you'll see that you'll get 3 minutes once you give your name and where you live. And there's also a warning light that comes on. Is that 30 seconds? Or
30 seconds.
30 seconds. So in 2.5 minutes, the warning light will come on. So if you could finish give your name, where you live, and then we'll start the timer at 3 minutes.
Thank you very
Welcome.
much. All right, my name is Kimberly Pittman. I live in Fall Creek, and I probably won't take the whole 3 minutes, and I really appreciate this, sir. It took us a while to get out here. It's a 50-mile round trip for us. Our whole issue is the winter storm that has happened. We have property out there, about 20 acres. We were down in California celebrating her 70th birthday, and we were feeling pretty lucky that we missed out on all the bad storm that everybody went through and the freezing temperatures and stuff. We came home, lucky for us, our house wasn't damaged. A lot of our neighbors have homes that are damaged and buildings, but we have downed trees like crazy. I mean, our property really looks like a hurricane came through. We understand that Lane County Public Works is not offering any kind of help in the cleanup as other cities and localities have done. For instance, the city of Lowell, since they have a burning ban, they have at their wastewater treatment plant an area where the people who live in the city can bring their yard debris for free for them to chip and dispose of. Well, being outside the city of Lowell, we don't qualify. We're looking into options about renting a container or taking our debris to, what's it called? Lane Forest Products. And the expense of doing that is, we're just starting this, so we haven't got the numbers, but we can. Is just astronomical. And so our only option as homeowners, and given our age, and we don't drive big tractors and things like this, is to burn. Well, we don't want to burn. It's bad for the air, it's bad for everybody's health, and we're trying to avoid that. Already, my understanding is El Rapa are asking people to wait until the debris is even drier before they do burn. Well, people are burning right now because the time frame is very limited. So we're up against that. And the other thing is, the fire department is pretty concerned about all the debris that's down, which is fuel for fires, the upcoming fire season. So they would like to see us all get rid of it. So we're really asking that Lane County can come through somehow and maybe have a designated area for each little locality like Lowell has, for the homeowner to be able to bring their debris to them and they, dispose of it in the way that they can. So we don't have to travel. It would be 30 miles for us round trip to take it to, excuse me, I've never done this, so.
You're doing great.
Anyway, the cost is going to be terrible. And so given the cost of doing that, it forces the homeowner, I think like us, who are on a fixed income, to burn, and which we're trying to avoid. So we're asking for help. And I want to point out that we've been living out there for 5 years. Up to date, we've paid $18,000 in property taxes. We've never asked Lane County for anything, and now we are.
Well, thank you very much for your public comment today. And you can now come up to the microphone if you want to give 3 minutes, or you don't have to. Thanks so much for your public comment.
I'm not sure that
You
I
wanna
have
add to it?
anything to add, but
So if you could give your name and where you live, and then we'll start the timer for
Yeah.
3 minutes.
yeah, I'm Deborah Lilly, also live in Fall Creek. And I think Kim pretty much covered it, but just, just the sheer volume is overwhelming. We've got, it took 4 hours, well, actually almost 5 hours for people just to clear the driveway to get to the house. And we've got 20 acres of down trees. And like Kim says, we're really lucky that the house didn't get hit. But we want to do the responsible thing and remove the debris. We're willing to do the work ourselves. But, so we're not asking somebody to come pick it up, but we just want a place to go take the debris. We've rented a trailer to, takes about 6 cubic yards per load. And if there was some place we could just take it, drop it off, and then from there, whether the fire department burns it in a responsible way, or it gets chipped, or it's someplace it can sit and just rot, I don't know. But that's what we're just hoping that you guys could help out. Just, we really see it as an air quality issue. And I know Commissioner Bernie's on the LaRapa board, and Commissioner Bocevich has been real related to LaRapa, and I think Commissioner Buck, you're our commissioner, but we're just hoping that, you can understand the concern and maybe, give some direction to help out folks like this, so we're not trying to burn stuff that's too wet to burn, or we're waiting for it to dry, but then the burn season's over and it's, more of a fire tinder, and you can't run chainsaws and so on and so on. So hopefully you understand what we're asking for.
Yep, thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it, sure. I'll go back to the remonstrance just to point out a couple of things. The first is that a woman named Sequoia Walking Feather wrote me the other day, and I thought that her letter was pretty important, so I asked her if I could distribute this to the commissioners, and she said yes. And she's basically describing what the impact of a pesticide overspray incident was on her back in September of 2018, and just ask the commissioners to take a look at her letter, which I thought was quite courageous of her to write, and allow us to discuss that at some level here at the board. The other thing, I want to thank all the people that came for public comment, and I guess, on the topic of housing and your proposal for a repeal, my understanding is that the prohibition against cities and counties from enacting rent control was something that the legislature put into this recent legislation, and it was intended specifically to stop cities and counties from enacting any kind of rent control. Now, you're shaking your head, so I think maybe I'm misspeaking myself, that it was previously in state law, but they didn't use the opportunity to change that prohibition, so they maintained the prohibition on local governments. And while that may or may not be a good thing to have rent control, they apparently did allow rent control, but with increasing levels of raising rent that landlords are now allowed to do statewide, and that they are doing. And I've had several people, besides you, approach me on the topic of, well, what can local governments do? And as we learned, the answer is not much until that prohibition is lifted. On the topic of the Wayne Morse Free Speech Plaza, I was opposed to the board using its emergency powers to close the Free Speech Plaza. Be that as it may, the hours are currently in place on the Free Speech Plaza. I personally would like to see the board move to open the Free Speech Plaza on a 24-hour basis. I'm not talking about opening all county facilities, certainly not the buildings, certainly not the portions of the plaza that are outside of the Free Speech Plaza, but I do agree with you that there are Oregon constitutional and U.S. constitutional free speech issues, and as was pointed out, the courthouse and the imagery of a courthouse as being one of the premier places where people in the United States can go to protest not only what the county is or is not doing, but what the federal government or the state government or the city government is or is not doing. That it's a important place for purposes of public protest and public discourse. And quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why we have a Wayne Morse Free Speech Plaza. So I do agree with you on that. And I've talked a little bit about the sheriff's letter. It's going to mean that we will need to get into a process of appointing a new sheriff or allowing the legal process to unfold whereby the current number 2 person in the sheriff's office becomes the sheriff by operation of law. We'll hear a presentation from Mr. Mokrahysky and HR at some point in the meeting. We also have scheduled some time next Wednesday if the board wants to move ahead with some discussion about the sheriff vacancy. Okay, let's now move to item 4, which is our emergency business. And I don't think we have any, but I'll just, okay? And then, Mr. Mokrahysky, we are going to be moving then after the consent calendar to have Dr. Creer, and then our item 13B after him, right? Becky. Becky Taylor?
That's right.
Okay. And then beyond that, I guess we'll touch base with you on what else we need to do. So at this time, we can move to item 5, which is our consent calendar. And these are items that are considered routine. And if there's any commissioner that wants to take something off the consent calendar for a separate vote or discussion, this is a good time to raise that. If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as printed.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Okay. Okay, moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Burney to approve the consent calendar as presented in the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. Vote is 5-0. Measures Measure passes, all orders are approved in the consent calendar. So I'll call Dr. Casey Creer up next, and this is item number 6A, Order 19-04-02-04, in the matter of approving the Performance Auditor's Audit Plan as recommended by the Performance Audit Committee. Dr. Creer is the Lane County Performance Auditor. We set this up for a 15-minute item, so please present away.
So, since I have 5 minutes, I want to try to give it a shot. Can you time me? You got the timer?
Well, I
right?
got 3 minutes here, and I can do it.
Give me a
in
3 and a
2.
2.
Here we go.
All right, let's give it a shot. I just wanted to hit the highlights of this particular agenda packet, which was a move to adopt the board order developed by the Performance Audit Committee and myself. But before we did that, I wanted to give you a little bit of backdrop in history. Back in July of 2016, the board was asked to approve the former performance auditor, Mrs. Shanda Miller's two-year audit plan that was developed by herself and the Performance Audit Committee at that time. The order was then approved in 2016 and was slated to go through 2 years for 2018. Few of the audits that were completed at that time listed underneath in this actual packet include the behavioral health audit, the road maintenance audit, cash handling, and then the financial indicators. Ms. Shanda Miller obviously left around 2017, at which point I came in, recruited by the lovely Laura Vinson back there for Human Resources and the HR Director, Alana Holmes. Glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And then the next audit taken up on my part was still underneath that two-year audit plan of recruitment and retention. Selecting that audit in particular had several purposes, the likes of which are detailed in the actual packet, but the gist was basically to give me a good introduction to the actual organization itself, while at the same time meeting the employees. And while hearing from those employees, create kind of a pseudo-risk assessment whereby you can hear the opinions and thoughts of the actual employees, though it wouldn't be an official one, but it would start to give a sense of what all happens within the county that could potentially be addressed in the future. Having completed recruitment and retention just recently, by the time it was completed, the two-year audit plan was expired. So as a result of that, we now need to do a new two-year audit plan. But before we can actually do that, this topic was brought up at the December 20th Performance Audit Committee meeting, where I met with the Performance Audit Committee and discussed that there was one particular area of interest that had caught my eye. And having discussed with the administrator, other staff, and actually meeting with a couple of the personnel, there was the area of the Parole and Probation Division, which had several adjustments over time, and the discussion that I had with Director Rickoff indicated that it might be a potential area of interest. The other key area, which is why I'm here, was also the fact that a risk assessment would also need to be done. Since the last time it had been completed was more than 3 years ago. We're going on 4 years at this point. So the Performance Audit Committee recommended 2 potential projects, one being the risk assessment, the other being the parole and probation audit. But then looking at the fact that the risk assessment expired and it's going on about 4 years old, coming up in June, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that the Performance Audit Committee would support me in recommending that the risk assessment take precedent over the parole and probation audit, which is the recommendation of myself and the committee at this point. Policy-wise, it hits on to 2 particular areas, one being that under Lane Manual 3.078, the auditor needs to submit a 2-year plan, but part of that 2-year plan needs to also be supported by a risk assessment that is completed. Another area of interest that is brought up was mentioned to me by some of the staff over in Health and Human Services about Lane County serving as the community action agency. And as a result of that, it has organizational standards it needs to abide by in order to secure funding such as the Community Service Block Grant. And Lane County being a community action agency, they highlighted organizational standard category 4, which is vision and direction, organizational leadership, which states that the department complies with its local government's risk assessment policies and procedures, and as a result, Lane County needs to have an organization-wide comprehensive risk assessment completed within the last 2 years. So these issues about bringing forth a 2-year audit plan and then actually having a risk assessment completed so that other areas of the government can continue on in their functions and have degrees of funding through grants and things of that nature also help to indicate the need for the risk assessment. At this point, one of the options that are listed, and the primary option I would suggest would be for the board to approve a countywide risk/needs assessment that will inform the construction of a full audit plan. That risk assessment would essentially be a comprehensive complex systems risk assessment, which by means of mixed methods will both qualitative and quantitatively factor inherent control and detection risks within Lane County, within the Lane County organization based on a linearly developed scale as determined by identified institutional values and precedents, such as the 2018-21 strategic plan, and then identification of those risks being their accepted, identification of risk and their acceptable levels being made possible through the enterprise's policies, procedures, goals, and interactions with citizens and county personnel at various levels of the government.
All right.
I do.
Thank you. What was the time?
That was great. It was 5.5 minutes.
I'll take it.
Very good. Okay, at this point, I'll call for a discussion or motion, whichever. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can make a motion after a bit, but I serve as your liaison, your voting member of the Performance Audit Committee. So I work with Dr. Creer on preparing this report, and well done in reading it out loud and getting the information out, Dr. Creer. I support the recommendation that's being made by the committee and by the performance auditor. And I'd like to invite you also, beyond the recommendation that's being made today, to take a look at the audit that's just been completed, that's been published online. You can take a look at it. I don't know what that is.
Go Ducks.
Your time's up.
I'll call you later, Coach. So, take a look at it. It's, the analysis of it is not complete yet, and don't have it in the form where we can present actually really a presentable, executive summary, so to speak. But take a look at that if you get a chance. Dr. Creer has done yeoman's work since arriving at Lane County, dug in very deep. And if you take a look at the report, the audit, you'll see that it is comprehensive, deep, and wide, and covers a lot of territory. But back to today's business, Mr. Chair, I do support the recommendation, and when the time is right, I would like to make the motion.
Time is perfect. Okay.
I'll make the motion then. Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the board order approving the County Performance Auditor's audit plan.
Okay, further discussion? Seconded. Okay, moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Bozievich, to approve Order 19-04-02-04, the Performance Auditor's Audit Plan. And I'll just say, once again, I think we are very well served by having a county performance auditor. The position of county performance auditor, really important to the organization. And I think, Dr. Creer, you're doing an excellent job in that position. But my real concern here is to make sure that the board fully supports your work, and I believe the board does. And I just wanted to thank you for the good work you're doing. Further comments?
To the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. And a recommendation that we re-undertake a countywide risk assessment comes on the heels of 4 years ago now, Shannon Miller completed the risk assessment. And you may recall that the #1 item of risk to the county was behavioral health issues. We addressed that in some ways. We continue to work on that, but the work plan that came out of that initial risk assessment has been comprehensive. It was a great risk assessment. Things have changed. We have a dynamic county with different pressures, different things happening throughout the county. So this is a good time to take a look at it, reprioritize, and see where we need to head for the next 4, 5, 6, 8 years. So Dr. Curry, it is a pleasure working with you. Thank you.
Commissioner Bernie?
Forgive my naivete. You know that part you read that had linear in it? It was past your 5-minute self-imposed
Is that what it
deadline.
was?
Could you read that paragraph to me again? Because I was trying to follow it. I'm not sure I understand what it means.
A comprehensive, complex systems risk assessment, which by means of mixed methods will both qualitatively and quantitatively factor inherent control and detection risk within the Lane County organization based on a linearly developed scale as determined by identified institutional values and precedents, such as the 2018-21 strategic plan.
Got it. Well, I'm not going to take the board's time, but I'd almost like to get your input on what each one of those words means.
Okay.
You hear me? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do want to just ask, and I don't disagree because I don't have the background, and it's obvious that this is a function that's really needed. But based upon what you've seen, what is this county at risk of?
Like currently, like right now.
Yeah.
So one of the bigger ones, which is one of the topics I brought up in this actual reporting, would just be the parole and probation division. It's moved across a couple different departments over time. County administrator can speak to that on his front, but they've moved around a bit. There's a potential for funding, and then, you know, one of the bigger topics that we discussed at the Performance Audit Committee was the degree to which their operations are being affected based on budget constraints, staffing, the fact that they've moved into different areas within different departments, and how can that affect their best practices, and how are they relative to other parole and probation areas?
So, and thank you for indulging just a bit. So, are we at risk of not using best practices? Are we at risk of being financially liable for something in that instance? I'm just wondering, again, what are we at risk of in that, using that example?
So, from my perspective, I wouldn't be able to actually comment solidly on it until I actually got into the organization to actually do the actual audit on the actual procedures that they're currently taking. So I open it to Administrator Mark Orheisky, since that's one of his major areas with Director Rickoff, if there was a comment on parole and probation on that front.
So if I may, then in any risk assessment, does that mean we're looking at our financial liability by certain operations? Are we at risk of not getting grants? Are we at risk of not being as effective as we could be? I'm just wondering what a risk assessment measures in terms of risk. And forgive my naivete.
We could get sued as a result of a lot of our mental health activities and dealing with people that have mental.
Fiscal liability, yeah.
Absolutely.
I can tell you about the initial risk assessment and what it gave us. Your question for Dr. Kerr was, does it provide financial liability? Does it run risk of being sued? Yes.
Okay.
So it really is anything that potentially can be a risk to the county in terms of our general operation. That can, in many cases, it's a matter of identifying resources that we should have that we don't have. And sometimes it's identifying practices that we do have that we shouldn't have.
Okay.
So it really is broad depending on the particular item that's going to be assessed. And if you look at, for instance, our financial indicators, which was one of the first audits that was produced by the previous auditor's office, it gives you a list of good things that we're doing. It also gives you a list of bad things that we're doing.
Thank you. That answer. Thank you very much.
And my advice to the first auditor and my advice to the current auditor always was find the things we're doing well, because it makes it much easier to find out the things that we need improvement on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I just add one addition. If you look at the prior risk the risk assessment the prior auditor did, behavioral health, procurement, road maintenance, sheriff's office, cash controls, internal control training, financial indicators, all those things, they either fall into the category, if you look at where we have lawsuits pending or previous lawsuits, they oftentimes are in the behavioral health, mental health category or in the jail. Road maintenance, we have a $6 billion asset that we maintain between the roads and bridges. And so I think that from the audit function, they've looked at this as where do we have financial risk and where do we have risk and exposure as it relates to people that we serve and treat in the community.
Thank you. Answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, so anything further? Let's take the vote then. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. And the motion carries unanimously, 5-0, approving the order as presented. Thank you very much, Dr. Creer.
Thank you.
All right, and so we're next going to call up Ms. Taylor and Mr. Dingle. Item 13B, Order 19-04-02-07. This is a report in the matter of accepting a donation for funding a safety education campaign and our fatal crash investigation team, FCIT report. Mr. Dingle is our Lane County Counsel. Ms. Taylor is our Transportation Planning Manager. Is that the?
Senior Transportation Planner.
Senior Transportation Planner, thank you. And we set this up for a 15-minute presentation and 3 minutes per commissioner thereafter for discussion. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. We appreciate this opportunity to report to you on on transportation safety. The FCIT team works under my direction because of potential legal liability in the things that we discuss and the conversations that we have surrounding accidents and roads and our assets that are involved in that. With me is Becky Taylor, the Senior Transportation Planner in Public Works. She facilitates our meetings, coordinates everything, does a fantastic job, puts together these very attractive presentations. We started last year updating on a quarterly basis so that that was at the board's request, so you'd be familiar with the work that the team is doing. This is our first report in 2019, and I know we have a couple of new board members, Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Burney, so we thought we'd do a little deeper dive to give you an idea about what FCIT is and the kinds of initiatives that we're taking on. The real purpose of this is to align all the county departments around transportation safety in a very tangible way. That's reflected in the work that we do where we review police reports, roadway photos of actual fatal collisions, and talk about ways that they could have been prevented or mitigated. And consequently, our team includes representatives from County Council, Risk Management, the Sheriff's Office, Public Health, and then Public Works, Engineering, Maintenance, and Transportation Planning. And really, the big thing is to try, how can we stop or how can we prevent the kind of crash that we're looking at in the future? And then with the 3 E's, engineering, education, and enforcement, what actions would reduce this type of crash? So this began with a commitment by the board in 2017 to work towards 0 deaths by becoming a member of the National Strategy on Highway Safety. As I mentioned, this leverages the 3 E's approach to solving these problems: engineering, enforcement, and education. And that helps us maximize and leverage resources. The engineering aspect aims to incorporate safety as a priority of the transportation infrastructure, which features that minimize the frequency and severity of crashes. The risk approach to engineering safety recognizes that many people make mistakes, but they shouldn't have to die from those mistakes. Many of our fatal collisions are based on some degree of human error. Drivers also take more risk, such as speeding, because they perceive low consequences. A big part of the consequence perception is that people don't see traffic enforcement. Lane County doesn't have a traffic team. It was cut many years ago. More and more residents are constantly asking the sheriff for enforcement and complaining about speeding. Sheriff Trapp has indicated he'd need approximately 30 new officers in order to cover basic services before he could ever consider reinstituting the traffic team. And education is the third leg of the stool because there needs to be broader awareness and responsibility around transportation safety. So FCIT is involved in education initiatives, which we'll provide more detail about later in this presentation. But being able to present to you quarterly is part of that because your constituents view the webcasts and have actually contacted us afterward for safety presentations in their communities. So this is an effective tool for us.
to give you some background about our safety planning work. In 2017, the board adopted our first ever Transportation Safety Action Plan. This planning work was supported by a grant from the state and was developed in collaboration with Lane Council of Governments and involved a variety of stakeholders. We spent a lot of time trying to understand the problem by evaluating several years of crash data. We had previously identified some hotspot safety problems and developed engineering project solutions through our transportation system plan, which is a traditional engineering analysis. But we really needed this safety action plan to get at systemic safety issues. So instead of just looking at the location or frequency of crashes, we took a risk-based approach to safety by looking at all of the factors contributing to fatal and severe injury collisions. And that really helped us understand the nature of the problem so that we could develop effective solutions. We do need to prioritize our limited resources and at the same time have a measurable impact by reducing fatal and severe injury collisions. The data was important for us to sort out perception versus reality, where to focus our attention to have the greatest impact. The data shows that we do have an opportunity to save lives by focusing on high-risk factors, and most of these are preventable. It's important to note that most of the fatalities are in rural areas, and so consider that rural roads are pretty unforgiving in that they're windy and narrow, and speeds are higher, so there are typically severe outcomes with those collisions in rural areas. Most of the fatal collisions are roadway departure, and it doesn't take much to leave the road. You can look at your kids in the back seat and slightly drift off the road, and then suddenly you're in big trouble because there's no room to recover. And people are just driving too fast. The data shows that speed is the greatest risk, and this is a very difficult problem because our culture values moving quickly. Knowing that roadway departures are our greatest risk, we are focusing on engineering safety measures that help keep people on the road. We've been implementing roadway departure countermeasures on county roads since adopting our safety action plan and as part of our pavement preservation work. We've integrated safety edges and centerline rumble strips in our pavement overlays this summer and last, and we are implementing a countywide curve warning upgrade sign program, so you'll start to see things being done differently on Lane County roads in our effort to save lives. We know that we can't expect different results by doing the same things we've always done, and we want to change to lower our roadway fatality rate. However, it's important for you to also recognize that we have experienced some public resistance to change. As you can imagine, people like the rural character of the roads. And so, for example, we've heard that people don't like the big yellow signs. However, the purpose of signs is so that you can see them, and warning signs are especially intended to get your attention. So we are working on public messaging and education. Devin Ashbridge, our public information officer, is developing some safety education videos for us, and one on curve warning signs will be released soon. Also, a system-wide approach to safety helps with public acceptance because these features appear everywhere, and it becomes part of the landscape rather than a particular area feeling like it's carrying the burden. Our system-wide implementation, however, is slow and steady as we do have limited resources. We are tracking our engineering implementation in our computer mapping system, and this data is published on our webpage at Lane County Towards Zero Deaths. This visual here is an excerpt of our webpage map showing where we have implemented rumble strips and curve warning signs. Over time, we hope to correlate the crash data with our safety improvement locations to hopefully see a reduction in crashes where we've made improvements. And now I'm going to turn it back to Steve to talk about our education initiatives.
This is a very exciting part of this, and this is a direct result of this group. One of the things that was identified, that the FCIT identified early on, was the lack of driver education in schools. It kept coming up over and over again in community conversations, especially in the rural areas. Stakeholders convened to explore possibilities and develop a feasible scenario. With a grant from ODOT, Lane Education Service District was able to hire a coordinator to develop a new program to increase driver education access to rural high school students. So the latest news from this coordinator as of 3/28 is that there are now 9 more trained instructors. That was the first barrier to overcome, was have instructors to teach the course. The coordinator has been recruiting instructors and making the training more convenient. As a result, the providers have reinstated driver education at Junction City High School and Crestwell High School. They also recently received a $15,000 grant from State Farm for a scholarship fund to lower the cost of taking the classes so that more students will take advantage of it. There's still a shortage of trainers, so we're helping with the recruitment by asking community members to step up, become a trainer. The next training session for new instructors is coming up between May and July over 9 weekends. Please help us get the word out. Education, this is something else that, again, this is something that the group came up with, was to, and I think we mentioned it briefly in our last presentation, we hosted our first transportation safety campaign last summer in the Cottage Grove Community Center. I'm trying to remember what time it started. It was after 5 o'clock. I think it was like at 6. You can see from the slide, we provided a general safety presentation at the beginning of the event and then distributed different kinds of things to highlight the 5 things people can do to reduce fatal collisions. Maintain safe speed, designate a sober driver, drive carefully, turn off cell phones, and buckle seatbelts. We also raffled off prizes thanks to donations from the Lane County Sheriff, bike helmets, Department of Transportation, umbrellas and reflective lights, LTD flashing lights. These not only made the event fun, but it also gave folks a real safety equipment that they can use. There are several Lane County roads in the area with high crash rates, fatal and injury collisions, including London Road, Row River Road, and Sears Road. We showcased those roads and the safety engineering projects. And I think I mentioned, this is the one where we actually had a diagram showing what the plan was to remove some fixed objects and actually allowed the residents to have input into what they would propose for improving that. This was just discussed at our last meeting, which is working from this model. You can see the slogan up there, respect yourself, respect the hood. This was created, and this is another example of the partnership by Lane County Public Health on a responsible drinking campaign to avoid intoxicated driving, which is a factor in 56 of the fatal and severe injury collisions that occurred on Lane County roads between 2012 and 2016. This was a successful campaign in the Whitaker neighborhood several years ago, and we're looking at including this in our toolbox for broader deployment, discussing creating signs with this message on it, especially to target areas of concern where there's a higher risk of intoxicated driving, such as satellite events around the country fair, some of these concerts and some of these other things that are going on in rural Lane County. Public Health is also currently working with ODOT to bring marijuana drugged driving prevention campaign to Lane County, and we in the FCID are interested in supporting and promoting this work. And again, an important function of FCID is to align county departments around traffic safety. I think this is, we view this as another success story. Lane County is a member of the Regional Safe Lane Transportation Coalition, which is managed by Lane Council of Governments. The coalition has been working with Lane County Public Health on a Get a Ride campaign to promote responsible options rather than driving intoxicated. The campaign was promoted during the Roadie Days Festival last Florence in May. They also helped promote overtime work of the Lane County Sheriff's Office during the festival to ensure public safety. So the funding came from a variety of sources. The Sheriff's Association, ODOT helped out with some grants, but the Sheriff's Office was able to staff deputies in the Florence area for this event. So deputies made several contacts with motorists. Citations included 1 driving while suspended, 15 speeding citations, 8 seatbelt citations, 6 other miscellaneous moving violations, notably no DUIs. So the thought is that hopefully this had to do in both the campaign efforts ahead of the program as well as the increased information about the increased enforcement. So again, it was very successful in stopping people from driving while intoxicated. As I mentioned earlier, the Sheriff's Office has a real problem with a shortage of folks who can barely respond to emergency calls in rural Lane County, let alone regular enforcement. There's no longer a traffic team. And so The officers work overtime with grant funding for targeted enforcement, like the example I just gave with the Roadie Festival. We'd obviously like to see more enforcement resources. But again, what the group does is tries to be creative within the resources that we have. So for example, you see the picture of the active radar thing. Again, they don't give tickets, but it's pretty solid that it does slow people down when they see that happening. The sheriff has offered and under development is an FCIT decoy patrol car. Essentially, it's a car that's no longer being used, but it would be set out to, again, not unlike this, to slow people down and move it around to different places. We're planning on kicking this tool off on the Beaver-Hunsaker Road, and Delta has volunteered their gated driveway on Beaver Street as a place to park the decoy car. And this is actually on Hunsaker Lane, where our most recent fatality occurred. This is another initiative. We've had a number of pedestrian fatalities, and in response to a specific one earlier this year, Lane County is working with regional partners to improve safety on the Beaver-Hunsaker Road corridor. On January 17th, Irene Ferguson was hit and killed by a car while walking with her walker. The new safety initiative includes engineering and education actions, which Becky will explain to you in a moment, and an educational program. One of the things we're asking the board to do, and this is again just the way that this group works, is to officially accept a $200 donation from Delta Sand and Gravel, which they've pledged towards the production of safety education signs that look like this. Delta and Knife River have also pledged to donate reflective vests to assisted living centers in the vicinity. Stan Pickett of Delta will be joining Becky in a pedestrian safety education presentation to the Lone Oak Assisted Living Facility next week to provide vests so that residents will be encouraged to wear before taking their walks.
For more context about the Beaver-Hunsaker Corridor, in 2017, the board adopted the Beaver-Hunsaker Corridor Plan following a community planning process that included a public workshop at North Eugene High School and public hearings before the Transportation Advisory Committee to evaluate the transportation needs along the corridor and develop a preferred solution for meeting those needs. The outcome was design concepts to improve safety by reducing vehicle speeds through design features such as on-street buffered bike lanes, narrower vehicle travel lanes, sidewalks, as well as raised pedestrian crossings, doubling as traffic calming. That would better support lower posted speeds of 25 miles an hour instead of 35. Lane County received federal funding through the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization to continue this design work. The funding is programmed for 2021, and it is only for design funding, not construction. Through this process, we'll be able to develop a shovel-ready project after working through all of the design details with the community and affected property owners, such as the precise location of sidewalks, crossings, driveways, and stormwater. A final recommendation from the plan was a vision for a new bike path along the urban growth boundary to connect the existing riverbank path that currently terminates at Division Avenue, and then continue on the east side of Beaver Street, and then continue northward to Admiral Street, which connects to Wilkes Drive to School and Parklands to the north. This path would primarily be on Delta Sand and Gravel's property, and they've been actively involved through the planning process and supportive of this concept. So that's ultimately what we would like to do. We don't have construction funding, and we know that reconstruction will be very costly. So in response to the fatality in January, we've been exploring some lower cost, more immediate improvements for the corridor. This hasn't been finalized yet, but it's looking feasible to create some walking space within the existing pavement area by resurfacing and restriping the roadway, shifting the travel lanes and fog lines to provide at least 4 feet of walking area on the south side of Hunsaker Lane, then installing a pedestrian-activated flashing beacon for people to more safely cross the street at the Tato Street intersection, and then shift the walking area to the north side of the street, and then continue along Delta's property as a new path along their frontage. The walking area within the pavement footprint next to the travel lane would be delineated and protected from vehicles with vertical delineators, shown in this image here with the white reflective sticks next to the bicycle. We still need to work through all of the details, but again, it's looking promising that we could obtain federal funding through the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization to realize these improvements as soon as summer 2020.
So our next quarterly report will be in August. Between now and then, we can provide you with updates on safety efforts, especially construction projects in your districts. And I think we've previously mentioned if anyone wants to host one of those educational campaigns like the one you saw that we did in Cottage Grove, let us know. We'll work to organize that. And with that, just here if you have any questions.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A great presentation, again. The first thing I'm going to say is congratulations. I do this every time I see you, particularly in public, on 2016 Outstanding Public Employee in Lane County, Becky Taylor. Congratulations again. I'll say that every time I see you, so get accustomed to that. And it was well earned. You know, I spent the last 6 years on the MPC, the MPO, and so I've seen your presentations quite frequently on let's see, Towards Zero Deaths, which is the national equivalent of that we're a part of. And really everything meshes very nicely. A lot of the things that you're doing are things that you've been talking about doing since the first time I met you, and we're beginning to implement them. And while we haven't seen a reduction in fatalities yet, it's an ongoing process. You're identifying the places where it happens the most and working with the state and working with the federal government to make sure that we're using best practices. So one best practice that you showed up there, the flashing sign or the sign that says your speed is, there's some controversy about how effective that is. I've read a lot of reports on it, and I have reports here that say radar sign, the reports are called radar signs slow decline in average speeds, radar signs show shift of peak speeds to lower speeds, long-term reduction in speeding drivers, long-term reduction in average speeds. So all indications are, for me personally, but anecdotally also, that you slow down when you see the sign. I drive down Royal Avenue and come to Prairie Mountain School and they say your speed is, and I look down and 26. You know, so as often as not, I notice that and I reduce my speed. So we can presume that a certain percentage of people are going to pay attention to that. And Becky, you've said that speeding is one of the leading causes of fatalities. Speeding and immovable objects, I think is what they're called, or so I think we're moving in the right direction, getting people to slow down. But in particular, what really is really exciting, and I know that you've been working with Rob Zako and with others on this, is educating everybody as to the importance of paying attention. Because so frequently it is simply not paying attention, whether it's to your speed or, as you mentioned a moment ago, you turn around to check on your kid's car seat in the back seat. You know, it only takes a moment. So I really applaud the work that you're doing because it is a work in progress, and the quarterly reports are outstanding, and you report positive results every time that I hear it. Until we have a traffic team, the best response is education and engineering, and I'm sure Commissioner Bozievich, who's been working with this probably a lot more deeply than I have, particularly with the 126 corridor, which is one of the worst places in the entire West Coast for fatalities. You know that engineering is also an important element. So I'll wait to hear more. But the last thing that I'm going to say is I question the removal of so many trees. You know, if you drive to Florence today, you will get stopped close to Walton for an extended period of time while they remove trees. Now, it's not my personal time that bugs me about that, but they're taking out a lot of trees. Some of them are up embankments where you're going to hit the embankment and stop long before you get to the tree. So I question the validity of the number of trees that have been removed and the resource use. You say we have few resources to engineer and to provide education. So I'm just a voice in the wilderness sometimes on that. But when the neighbors talk about the excuse me, the esoteric value of what the roads look like, you say they don't like the big yellow signs. Well, they don't like the big yellow signs, of course, but we're going to have them. They do like the trees. Do we have to take out as many? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, Commissioner Bozievich?
Thank you. So I'll follow real quick on the tree removal west of Walton. That is a project that is going to add a new passing lane along that length, and the tree removal up the embankment is because they have to cut the embankment back to make wide enough for the travel lane. So
Well,
it may seem excessive now, but when they're all done, you'll see that. But I will also remind folks that, we heard from a couple property owners about this past winter storm. All those trees that are anywhere within, 50 feet of a roadway are potential trees across the roadway in a winter storm. So, just remember that too. It may not be necessarily in the safety zone as far as runoff for a fixed object collision, but there's other issues with trees close to roadways too.
I'm not going to camp in any of the trees.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
So just so you know, that's what's going on there west of Walton. That's actually thanks to some work done by our local legislative team here in Lane County to get some extra money for Highway 126 safety improvements, along with the rumble strip work they've done, some guardrail work. They're adding that additional passing lane in the westbound direction so that maybe some of the less patient people don't attempt to pass in areas they shouldn't, and just provide a little bit more safety in that drive to and from the coast. I had a quick question. If you could jump back to the map you had that showed the various locations of safety improvements. It was about maybe 10 slides back. I don't know if you can get. Oh. There. So I was trying to really quick look at the legend and follow that because I have real concern about shoulder rumble strips as a cyclist. And the photo you showed, it forces cyclists into the travel lane unless there is a wide enough shoulder outside the rumble strips. And the only place I'm seeing those, it looks like that's Marcola Road.
That's correct, and we share your concern. It's not part of our system-wide toolbox, the shoulder rumbles. We know that there's a lot of factors to consider, so we're taking a context-sensitive approach, making sure that we have wide enough shoulders, that we engage the community in advance. It's very unlikely that we'll have much more shoulder rumble strip installation.
Yeah, I know that at least the closer in portions of Marcola have a pretty broad shoulder. And in fact, there's roads like Hill and Donna that avoid using, and Sunderman, where you can avoid using Marcola altogether anyway. So that's probably not as big. I just was concerned if there was anywhere else in the county, and I didn't get a long enough look at that map to.
Just Marcola Road.
As a cyclist, because I noticed, it looks like Poodle Creek was one of the ones that got rumble strips, and that is a well-traveled cycling route. But by the legend, it's centerline, so it's not going to impact that cycling community.
That's correct.
So with that, I see that there is a board order with this to accept the $200 contribution from Delta, which I really appreciate them being concerned with safety in the local neighborhood there. And if it's all right with the chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 1904-0207.
Okay, it's been moved to approve the order as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bozievich, second by Commissioner Farr to approve the order. Further discussion? Go ahead.
I'm honored to meet the 2016 Lane County Employee of the Year.
And that's not Lane County as an organization. That was the entire county, all public employees, city, municipal, state. It's an LCOG award. So I just want to point that out. It's not just Lane. I mean, we say Lane County public employee, but I want to make it clear. It's, public employee in Lane County, including everybody.
I must not be as new as I thought, because I'm actually enjoying Commissioner Bozievich correcting me. I didn't like it at first.
Yeah. No, I was clarifying what the award was for.
Thank you.
Here's a picture of the award being given, by the way.
I would also like to propose that we have a Jay Bozievich cyclist map and have it only be where there are rumble strips. Now, having said that, I have a question. Do we require a board order every time we get even a $200 contribution for this?
Chair Sorensen, Commissioner Bernie, yes, we're going to go back and change the the manual. Currently, it's very oddly written. It only applies to parks. So we actually are going to correct that and change it so that when these kind of donations come in, we don't have to go through this process. But we, in fairness, we thought that this was a good opportunity to give those folks who are making the donation a public acknowledgement of it. I mean, that you saw the kind of work that they're doing, the cooperation that they're giving, and they, I mean, bottom line is some of this stuff wouldn't happen without them. So.
Oh, I wasn't questioning that. I was just asking procedurally.
That's a good, procedurally, it's a good question, and yes, when this came in, we went and looked at the manual and saw that it was outdated, and we plan on making that manual change and bringing it back before the board at some point in the future.
It was a good opportunity to be caught up, and I thank you very much for that also.
Okay, good. Anything further? Yes.
I just want to state that I appreciate the business community coming together and other organizations coming together to make some change that will affect people's actual real life on this planet. All this work that's been done on behalf of the county or behalf of the cities in our community to make our streets safe is only bolstered by the efforts of the business community and other members in the affected areas. So I just want to give my appreciation to that.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. First one was, I know we regrettably got the, death title for a county in Oregon several times, but that seems to be fading in terms of more recent years. Do you have, who was the 18 death leader? Who was the 17? And I thought we were 16, right? We were then.
We're still in the top 3.
Okay.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
The rankings.
Do you think that has been significant? In other words, that we've actually declined a bit relative to the other counties? We were the death leader, but now we're fortunately not the death leader, or is it that significant?
I would like to think so, although a couple of years is probably too soon to measure success, but
Yeah.
I hope that we're making a difference.
Okay, good. I do too. And the other question I have has to do with cameras. You mentioned things like rumble strips, education, visibility crosswalks. I know Beaverton and Portland in particular have used cameras as a way of getting enforcement. And where does that stand? Are we are you pointedly going away from cameras? Are you in favor of cameras? If you are, what do we need to do to get going on cameras? I personally think that it was a mistake not to list cameras, given the significance of enforcement as a reason for why people drive so fast. I think cameras are something we should be pursuing, and you didn't mention cameras are a tool that local governments are using. So could you, I brought up cameras like 5 times. So are you against cameras or what?
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. The FCIT and I, we're in favor of tools that work, and you're correct, that tool has shown to be effective. We are paying attention to what other communities are doing, and there's currently a Senate bill to expand camera usage in cities. There's also a proposal to amend ORS to provide more clarity about speed setting that works in our favor regarding more local control. There are some procedural things that we need to work through before we pursue legislation that would enable us to use automated enforcement, and it has to do with things like we don't have posted speeds in rural areas, and there's a basic rule where we need to clarify a maximum speed within basic rules. So Association of Oregon Counties is working on a comprehensive speed study process. Our traffic engineer is represented on that. So we're paying attention to it, and
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Chair Sorensen, if I could jump in here a little bit too, and yes, it does require specific authorization for the legislation, but you also, one of the things we talked about in FCIT is it isn't truly just automated. There has to be somebody to test it, which obviously impacts the resources of the sheriff's office. So it's not like, I mean, you'd like to hope that everyone who gets mailed a ticket is just going to roll over and mail it in, but you have to plan for the possibility that they don't. So we have talked about it, and we have discussed it. It is effective, but it's making it work again within the resources that we have. And we do need the authorization from the legislature.
Okay, Commissioner Bernie, next round.
Forgive me, I'm rumble strip fixated. Do the lane assist technology that's in cars that makes you feel like you're going over a rumble strip without a rumble strip, to your knowledge, are there companies now developing that to be retrofit in vehicles so that it could eliminate the cost for counties in setting down rumble strips?
I don't know anything. It is a very odd feeling. I can tell you that even in the same year car from the same manufacturer, they're not in both. So my wife and I both have the same year car.
Right. No, that's
Her Explorer has it, my truck does not. And it is a very odd feeling. It'll actually start doing that when you approach the center line, whether or not there's a rumble strip there.
Right.
It's just, I don't know, I'm not sure how it works, but all of a sudden it's shaking.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I just see a business opportunity there, but that has nothing to do with
Okay, anything
I was just pointing
further?
out the rhyme or reason that both products are made by Ford. One has it, one doesn't. Seems odd, but.
yeah.
Okay,
Just ever so
Commissioner
briefly,
Farr.
regarding $200, it's not a lot of money, but Delta Sand and Gravel is also dedicating property, land for bike paths to make that entire corridor more safe. So they really are stepping up to the plate, and I'd really like to extend thanks to them for not only the $200, which isn't more than a drop in the bucket, really, but really the cooperation across the board that they are giving. So thank you.
okay, so we'll go to a vote on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Please, opposed, say no. The order carries 5-0, all commissioners voting, and the order is adopted. Thank you very much. Now let's go back to our adjustments to our agenda. And Mr. Mokrajska, I was thinking if we could have the executive session. I know Mr. Clark is not available after 11, I think. We could do that and then have that done, or we could take
Well, we have
your,
an 11 o'clock time certain, so you'd probably want to take the 11 o'clock time certain.
yeah, but our executive was announced at only 15 minutes. So if we did the 15 minutes, we'd be,
When did he have to leave?
he had to leave around,
I had to leave a little, no later than, I think, 11:15. I think
Yeah.
it's at 11:30, Doctor.
yeah. We either could do that now or we do it after lunch. Do you have a recommendation?
I mean, you don't have much after lunch because you just took the
Yeah, we have the work session on the chapter 14.
You have the 1 hour, so I'd say maybe do it this afternoon and try to
Okay.
get through. I worry about the jumping back and
Yeah.
forth
I
piece,
hear you.
because that takes time.
So then, let's go back on our regular plan here, and that would be item 7A. That'll cover your announcements and the sheriff retirement, and then we'll go into our 11 a.m. Time certain and the action on the letter to the health authority.
Okay.
Are
Thank
you
you, Mr.
ready to
Chair.
go with item 7A then?
7A is perfect, yep.
Okay,
Before we do the sheriffs, I thought I'd just give you a quick update on elections. I like to do this in the 2 months preceding the election, as our staff is doing a lot of work to prepare for that, to provide just a brief update to the board on what's happening. So we currently have 260,000 registered voters in Lane County. There are 188 open positions in 65 districts. 188 open positions in 65 districts. We've received 196 candidate filings. There are 23 contested races, so 165 races are not contested. All candidate filings are located on our website at lanecounty.org/elections, and you select May 21st, 2019 to see the filings. If you look back at the May election in 2015, we had 33 candidate statements. This year, For this election, we have 37 candidate statements. In 2015, we had 3 filed measures, and this year we have 4 filed measures. And in 2015, there were 3 arguments. This year, there are 19 arguments, so a big increase in the number of arguments submitted. Our staff last week, thank you to the commissioners that were able to stop by the elections office. They were just swamped, as you can see, with all of the filings and the arguments and the candidate statements. It's a lot of work to review all of that, particularly the candidate statements themselves. There's a lot of requirements under state law for what they have to meet, and so there's a lot of staff time that goes into that. And Mr. Rickoff was great at bringing food and encouragement. I was able to stop by, and I know we had at least a couple of commissioners that were able to stop by and thank staff, and they certainly appreciate that. They've been working really hard. The tentative mailing date is the week of April 22nd, so Lane County households will start to receive their ballots after that, but we'll begin mailing on April 22nd. And then the next process that we have to complete is the assembly and mailing of approximately 1,000 out-of-country military ballots by statutory deadline, which is April 5th. There are 247 ballot styles that are being proofed for this election. So just gives you, again, an understanding of the magnitude of work there. Okay, so want to jump into the sheriffs. We received a letter from the sheriff last week of his retirement date for April 16th. I was notified shortly before that and worked with our team here, Mr. Dingle, Ms. Holmes from Human Resources, and Judy Williams from County Administration. Alana and Judy just did fantastic work over the last several days through the weekend, preparing a number of options for the board. We want to be prepared to present to you what was done last time in 2015 when we had a vacancy of the sheriff, and then options for the board to consider so that we can make some decisions and move forward based on the process the board wishes. So let me first share with you that we do have a position description that is drafted and updated with all the information. And if the board wishes to post the position and accept applications, we're prepared to do that as early as today. So you can give the go-ahead, and we can do that today if that's one of the things you'd like to do. There are 4 basic criteria that are laid out in Lane County Charter, Chapter 5, as well as in Oregon Revised Statute 204.016. Those are essentially that the sheriff must be a legal voter of the state, must be a resident of the county, and shall have, and in order to be the elected sheriff, the election would be primary election in May of 2020, general in November, and the term begins January 2021. In order to be the elected sheriff, it's required that the individual have resided in the county at least 2 years immediately preceding the beginning of the term of office. So the term of office begins January 2021. So in order to stand for office, the sheriff would need to have been a resident of Lane County at least by January of 2019. So in terms of your appointment consideration, we don't believe that you have to appoint someone who's been a resident since January, but if you want someone that you appoint to stand for election in 2020, they would need to be a resident as of January 2019. And then that they must meet any other qualifications required by the state for such positions, and that includes the requirement to be certified as a police officer in the state under the DPST certification process. There are various requirements for that, including you cannot have a felony. So those are the charter and statutory requirements. That leads to, if the board were to pursue a process to accept applications, you really would be looking at applications from residents of Lane County, because the individual has to be a resident of Lane County to serve in that position. The other thing that I will say, in 2015, I'll just touch on that process briefly, when former Sheriff Tom Turner resigned to take a position as police chief in Florence, and the board went through an expedited process to accept applications, do interviews, and so the position was posted for a matter of days. Applications were reviewed, Human Resources determined whether or not the individuals met the qualifications under the charter and the statutes, and then forwarded the names. There were 2 names, Sheriff Trapp, who is then Chief Deputy Trapp, and another individual who was a resident. The board had interviews with those 2 individuals in a public session, conferred an executive session, then came out and made a decision. So that was how that was handled in 2015 when there were 2 candidates. The options that we believe the board has are the following: that you can, 1, direct the county administrator to conduct a recruitment process that includes the limitations by state statute and county charter for the position of sheriff, to fill the position until the next primary general election. And you could do, under that scenario, you could do one of 2 things. You could review the applications. We could accept applications, screen those, and then give those applications to you, and you could just appoint. Or you could review the application, the qualified applicants, you could conduct an interview, and then you could make the appointment. So that's the first option, is that we do some version of a recruitment process. I will say, if that's the board's desire, considering, I'd ask you to be mindful of the fact that at the end of April, we're going to be going through our budget process, and so you're going to hear on May 1st the recruitment and retention audit from the auditor. On May 2nd, we have the budget kickoff, and then we launch into budget committee, so it's going to be a really busy time at that period of time. And so our view from the staff perspective is we're ready to go if you wanted to do that, and we're ready to work very quickly, and we actually carved out time as early as next Wednesday morning to conduct interviews if that were your desire to do that. And there certainly are additional options you could consider there. The second option would be to appoint a new Lane County Sheriff without conducting an open recruitment process, filling the position until the next primary general. You can do that. You don't have to do an application process, don't have to conduct interviews. You could just appoint someone. They do have to meet the criteria that I outlined. And then the third option is you can do nothing. Mr. Dingle in 2015 prepared a memo for the board which outlines essentially the chief deputy position is the default sheriff in the absence of the sheriff. It's set up that way so that if something were to happen to the sheriff, the chief and the board does nothing. The chief deputy has all the authority of the sheriff until the next election. So that is an option for you to say, do nothing and just wait until the next election. So 3 options: direct us to pursue a process, just appoint somebody, or do nothing and allow the chief deputy. And the chief deputy position, as you all know, I believe, is filled with Chief Deputy Cliff Harold. One of the considerations I know that the board made, I'll just add this for another element for the new commissioners, that the board considered in 2015 was the things specified under the charter and statute are pretty clear, what the person has to have. The other thing that is relatively unique to a sheriff position in a county is the responsibility to manage a jail. That's not, well, there are, police departments some have municipal jails. A county jail is we talked earlier with the auditor, our risks here in the county, it's one of the largest areas of risk that we have. And so I know that was something that the board did consider, was experience managing a corrections system, a county jail. So I think that's everything. I don't know if you, Mr. Dingle.
Unless the board has a question.
Okay, these folks did all the work. I'm just sharing with you the options you have available, and we're here for questions.
Okay, so commissioners, why don't we just take a round of 3 minutes each just to give some thoughts and some feedback on this, and I'll call on Commissioner Farr first, and then Commissioner Buck, and then Commissioner Burney, then Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of quick questions. One is regarding the ability of the person serving as a sheriff to get out into the public and perhaps advocate for our ballot measure that's coming up in May. So Sheriff Trapp is able to do that. What would be the status of an appointed sheriff if we just went by the default position, or if we actually appointed a new sheriff?
I have, Chair Sorensen, Commissioner Farr, I'd have to go look at that, but I would, because the person who's appointed as the sheriff assumes all of the legal authority of the sheriff, it would seem to me that they would, my off-the-cuff answer would be that they would have that ability.
Thanks, and I researched it a little bit. And what I found is that if a process with an appointed sheriff who would stand for election in the next election cycle would be able to act as an elected sheriff. Whereas a default sheriff, if we just did nothing, the default would go to the primary officer, which would be the chief, who would then still not be an elected sheriff. So the default position would the head of the department would not be able to advocate for anything that was going on in the ballot in May. That's my understanding on that. So which kind of places a little bit of a question regarding, do we want the chief elected, the chief officer and law enforcement officer in the county helping us with the ballot? So that's a question that we need to consider as a board as we go forward. The second is, if we begin the process today, you said that we can conduct interviews as early as next Wednesday, which is April 10th. And at that point, on that day, we could actually move forward with an appointment that date. And someone that we appointed that day, he or she would stand for election at the next regular election cycle, which is in 2020.
If they chose to run, yeah.
If they chose to run.
It'd be their choice, yeah. And I should say, we discussed this with the chair this morning, and the chair brought this up, that we actually could, you do have Tuesday afternoon next week. We don't have an afternoon session, so you do have that time available. And if you want to pursue that timeline, we may want to carve out some time at least to review applications or talk about interview questions. It may be a little soon to do it on Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning, you don't have anything in the morning. You do have scheduled a jail tour at 1 p.m., which we encourage all the commissioners to attend that, because it's really one of the important functions for you to tour the jail on an annual basis. The Sheriff Trapp has indicated that, we could reschedule the jail tour if the board needed to accommodate that afternoon slot, so that could happen as well. But I just want to share with you that we have the afternoon of Tuesday and the morning of Wednesday that currently are open.
Then I've polled the board, and we all love Wednesday morning meetings. It's unanimous, I think. So. But that really,
Wait a minute.
our every week schedule we have meetings has Wednesday outlined for a meeting, so we all know that. Well, I'm inclined to say that I'll weigh in right now. I like the prospect of next Wednesday's interviews, whatever it takes in the HR department to get that underway immediately, and I'm prepared, if necessary, to make a motion to that effect. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Buck?
I'm second in line here, although I'm interested in hearing other thoughts before I make any final decision. I do want to say, though, I'm not really supportive of option 3, which is the do nothing and let it default. I really think that as a board, we should appoint somebody. And we should really do that by the retirement date of Sheriff Trapp. So personally, I would think that we want to get that done before the 16th. But I'm going to hold off any other comments till I hear from other commissioners.
Okay.
I agree with Commissioner Farr, and I agree for his reasons too. I think it's imperative we appoint. I think that we want our new sheriff to be able to be a part of the team that's providing information to our county on the courthouse ballot measure, and to have our support. That's it.
Thank you. So I support the expedited posting of the position and then getting to interview and appointment next week. I believe that, one, it's important to give the chief deputy that support that he actually went through a process. I think a direct, going with the option where we just directly appoint the chief deputy steals some of his legitimacy as a leader in some ways if he didn't have to actually stand for an open competition in some ways. In addition, it also gives time for any input from outside parties on who we should appoint to happen. I agree with Commissioner Buck. I think the option 3 of just allowing the chief deputy to assume the duties and be an acting sheriff, because that's what happens if we don't do it, is the title is not sheriff, it's acting sheriff, and therefore they're still an employee of the county and don't have the full duties of the sheriff, and therefore restricted in things like political activities. So, and there's other issues there. But I think it's really important that, we go through a process. There may be somebody we are just completely unaware of that's interested in being sheriff that may jump to the head of the line, and we need to allow for that to happen. But I do think it does need to be that expedited process you guys have outlined. And I'm available both Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning, whatever works out. You guys need to time for that. I always hold those days open.
Okay, I would say that we should not just let this default. That is always an option, and particularly for a short period of time. But I think we should avoid that, and we should have a deliberate process that is fair to all applicants. And one of the aspects of the fairness to all applicants is to make sure that when we post this, we let people know that the sheriff has resigned as of April 16 at noon, and that we intend on appointing someone as soon as possible. I don't think we should commit to a time for interviews until we know what the field is. In other words, if there's one candidate, I think we might want to have a shorter interview than if there are 5 candidates, and that'll involve a lot more logistics of whether those candidates are available. So I don't want to assume that we can just say, oh, okay, we're going to do this Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, when, as of today, we don't know if there are any candidates for the post. And because of the limitations, namely that they have to be a certified police officer, and for all practical purposes, they have to be a registered voter in Lane County, that limits the number of people that might be out there, whether that's Chief Deputy Harold or former Sheriff Tom Turner or whoever. We don't know what their availability is for next week, and we just need to be more flexible on the date and time for the interviews. So I don't want to eliminate candidates who do not hear about this, who aren't on the inside track and weren't told ahead of time that this was going to be happening. I wasn't one of those people, so I don't know in terms of people that would call me up, as they did last time, call me up and say, well, tell me about this. Is this already a done deal? That was their main question, the candidates last time, when we did the appointment last time. So I think we've learned a little bit from the last time, and one of the things I think we've learned is that by narrowing it in our availability, the job posting, to the major things, which are certified police officer, registered voter in Lane County, and no felony convictions. Those are the ones that have been repeatedly mentioned to me. If we get those in there and we post it, and we say it's going to be posted until filled. So it's not like we're going to be waiting around for a 30-day period, but we're going to wait around until such time as the board determines, okay, we've got 3 candidates, we got 2 candidates, we have 1 candidate. That's my view. So I don't want to rush this and have it next week. And this is important enough that I'm sure we can get together the board at a time to have the interviews that are where the candidates are available for the interview. We do not know when, the availability of the candidates because we don't know who the candidates are. So that'll be one of the things that needs to be put into the announcement. And also, would this be published in the Register Guard or newspaper of record? How would that be handled?
We certainly can do that. And I would say that last time what we did is in the announcement, the recruitment announcement, we put in there that the individuals would need to be available on a certain date and time. And so whatever the board, based on what the board directs today, if you want to pick a date and time for interviews, we can put that in there so that individuals know they would need to block that time. And that was done last time for similar reasons because there was a shorter time.
What if they're an employee of the sheriff's office and their supervisor does not give them time off? And they're not available?
Well,
Are they excluded then from applying?
We need to work through that scenario.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Probably just have a conversation with the supervisor.
Yeah, we'd probably talk to the supervisor because I can't imagine a scenario, at least within our organization, that wouldn't be accommodated, but theoretically it could happen.
Okay, yes. Let's have another round and we'll just start with you. Go ahead.
That leads to my question. It sounds like we do have some consensus over the fact that we want to have an open process of some sort. Length of time, maybe not. But in the announcements, where do you advertise all that? And another reason I ask is because I don't think we're going to get, 20 people applying. It's probably going to be a handful or less. But if the concern is that we're not able to get the announcement out to everybody quick enough, how can we alleviate that?
I can, Commissioner. One of the things that when you have a very limited thing like this, one of the things we could do is obviously the only people who are going to be eligible for this, the most obvious group, are current law enforcement officers. So if you send they live in Lane County. So if you send the announcement to Eugene Police Department, Springfield Police Department, Florence Police Department, any place that has a police department, you're going to hit the vast majority of, as a matter of fact, the only other group that, and then I would also suggest it's over OSP and then DPSST. That would be, you're probably double covering that way. And then the only other group that you're not hitting there is the one would be, and that other candidate in the last time was a retired. So the person was actually a police officer in California, retired, came to Oregon, was the police chief in Florence for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years, then retired. So, that would be my recommendation. If you want to hit, if you really want to target the groups that are potential, it would be all the people, all the entities in Lane County that have law enforcement. And I say DPSST only because you might be surprised at how many police officers live here that may work somewhere else. It's not beyond the pale that there's someone who lives in Lane County that works as a Lane County deputy sheriff, for example, or somebody who lives in Lane County, as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, that works with the state police.
And federal, too. I recall being interviewed for a security clearance, and it was a federal law enforcement officer that lives in Lane County. That's what they do. They interview people. And I just asked, well, are you certified police officer? And yes. So.
Yeah, and I think that DPSST, we can check on this. My recollection is that the DPSST, if you are retired, I think they actually have a notification process for folks that if they wish to be notified of their jobs.
Yeah.
Do you want, maybe Ilana can expand just on our notification process outreach?
Right. Depending on the length of time, I think will be one consideration. And some of the typical places we might advertise will be much more limited because of the restriction to Lane County. So, for example, sometimes we might also advertise in the Oregonian for the, broad regional aspects, but in this case, that really wouldn't make a lot of sense. So the Register Guard, I think we could hit the timeline, working with Laura to get something in there. Certainly, like the Oregon, I think there's a sheriff's association, so we could also, besides going to each of the public sector entities in our region, we could also look at associations and get the word out that way. And then I just think other community partners that Laura Vinson, our recruiter, has across the region. Our Equity Community Consortium groups, do a blast to them. And, probably a little bit more strategic in that way. And I would work with Laura to do that. And then I'm sure we would have availability to, I'd work with Judy, or I'm not sure if it's Devin, to put a notice on our website that when people hit the Lane County website that we're in active recruitment, here's the turnaround time, and a link to apply. So we could do some of those things as well.
Mr. Chair, I also wanted to just share with you that the sheriff sent me a message. I think he was watching the discussion and wanted to ensure the board that he will ensure that if there's any candidate in the sheriff's office interested in the process, that their time will be made available for an interview process whenever that would occur.
Okay, so let's go down the line here, and then we'll back to Commissioner Farr.
We started the line in a different.
Yeah, we started here before.
I think we know what we need to do. I mean, we're talking a lot, but it seems to me that we want to appoint, not allow, not do nothing. We don't want to be the do-nothing Board of Commissioners. We want to make the process, have a process so the appointment has the full authority and approval and support of the Board of Commissioners. And we want to do it as efficiently and expeditiously as possible. I mean, it sounds to me like that's what we need to do. And I have absolute confidence in what staff have articulated as how to get the word out to eligible groups in order to recruit very, very quickly. So that, to me, I'm in good shape with all of those things.
Thank you. So I'll just say very quickly, the law enforcement community is a fairly small community, and Sheriff Trapp has not hidden his desire to retire in the first half of this year. I've known about it for about 6 months or so. I've heard it talked about amongst law enforcement officers in this area that the retirement was coming. So I'm pretty sure most people in the law enforcement community were aware this was going to open sometime. So I don't, the concern about this suddenly being a surprise and all that, I don't think is really there. It's not like it wasn't unknown. And I believe that, through things like the Public Safety Coordinating Council and other associations, most of the sworn law enforcement officers in Lane County are probably pretty well aware that the sheriff was planning on retiring. So I'm not so concerned about a shortened process because I think folks that were thinking about applying have had ample time to be thinking about that. So I'm hopeful we can get this process done and complete so we can have an appointment ready to take over by noon on April 16th when the sheriff's retirement is official. So I just want to say I'm still supportive of the process that was put forward by the administrator and HR to try and get this taken care of and set up interviews for next Wednesday morning.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion.
Yep.
I move to instruct the county administrator to start a process for appointing a replacement sheriff, sheriff to replace retiring Sheriff Byron Trapp, with a timeline based upon interviews by the board to be scheduled no later than April 15th, which is next Monday. Now, April 10th is next Wednesday, so April 15th would be the Monday after that. Yeah. So that now we've expressed a preference for it to be Wednesday. A couple of us have anyway, but but I'm throwing April 15th as a date in there on this motion in order to accommodate Commissioner Sorensen's concerns regarding the number of people who may apply. So I'll repeat the motion. I move to instruct the county administrator to begin a process for appointing a sheriff to replace retiring Sheriff Byron Trapp with a timeline based on interviews by the board to be scheduled for April 15th or prior.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved to have the process and have the county administrator's staff move through that process and have the interviews between now and April 15th and the announcement and recruitment. Further discussion, because we'll keep going down the line here.
I'll pass.
Okay. Okay.
Satisfied with Ms. Holmes'
Okay. So any questions from staff?
Not so much questions, but just when the decision is made on the interview date, I'll work with you in advance of that to gather interview questions that you may be interested, so I can compile those and have those ready as well.
Okay. Well, sometime between now and the interview, we can work on the interview questions. I guess we'll ask that you prepare some from last time we used them and any others you think are appropriate.
Right here.
Okay, further discussion on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries unanimously. And thank you. We'll call Ms. Gaffney and your team up. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next up, we have two items that Ms. Gaffney will be presenting. The first is item 8A, Order 19-04-02-06, in the matter of approving the 2019-2021 biennial Mental Health and Addictions Implementation Plan, also known as BIP, to submit to the Oregon Health Authority, Addictions and Mental Health Division. And we set this up for a 45-minute period, of which 15 minutes would be an uninterrupted 15 minutes, up to, not precisely, but up to 15 minutes. So Ms. Gaffney, if you could introduce your colleagues and make your presentation.
Thank you, Chair Sorensen. And board, with me today is Pauline Martin, who's our manager at Lane County Behavioral Health, and Michelle Tentriella-Modell, who chairs the Mental Health Advisory Committee, which is also the local alcohol and drug planning committee. So the three of us today will share our 15 minutes to give you a high-level overview of the plan, and then we've reserved plenty of time for questions and conversation of areas that might be of interest to the board. We're going to start. I'm going to give a little bit of background on our process, and we're really going to focus most of the time today on the recommendations that are part of the plan so that we're clear about those. Just by way of background, ORS 430-630 requires that county local mental health authorities, and the Board of Commissioners serves as the local mental health authority in our community, requires that we produce a plan and that those plans determine the need for local mental health services and adopt a comprehensive approach to the delivery of those services. So that's what we are bringing to you today. Again, it addresses the full spectrum of services from prevention, universal prevention, all the way through treatment and aftercare in the community for children, adolescents, adults, and older adults. And we also are required, and it's good practice, to coordinate our planning effort with other local plans, key system partners such as the coordinated care organizations and the public safety coordinating councils, and then also to really build this work on the community health improvement plan, which is that larger overarching plan in the community. This plan will serve as a roadmap for certainly our starting point where we are now, but really looking forward into the future with that destination. The planning process really was overseen by our local mental health advisory committee, and I appreciate you setting a time certain for us today so it was easier for Michelle to be able to join us. And I want to give her just a couple minutes to talk about the role of the committee.
So the role of the committee is service folks who work with a lot of the community members who have mental health, substance abuse, developmental disabilities. And because they either are providers or provide support services, this plan was completely important because it addresses some of the gaps that we're seeing as providers in the community to stabilize the folks that we serve. And some of the key issues that Karen's going to bring out is recommendations such as housing. If we don't have housing, and we have people who are unhoused, stabilization is pretty much not impossible, but extremely difficult for people with mental health issues or addictions or people with developmental disabilities, and or respite care. Right now, we do have a 23-hour respite care, but having something sort of in between 23 hours and the ER would be fabulous, so we're not spending money sending people to an emergency room, which is very costly. So our committee was highly, robustly involved in the focus group and providing recommendations for this plan, and we would love to see them implemented in our community.
So before we get to those recommendations, I would like to give the board a sense of what the approach was in creating the plan. Our idea really is to create a living document that will be useful for you as the local mental health authority. It will be useful for the department in terms of the work that we do and for the larger community, both in setting priorities for how we spend our time and direct our work in that way, and also setting priorities for how we allocate the funds that we receive. So in terms of the timing for this plan, it comes to you now because we'll be getting ready as we move into the next biennium to award contracts for the funding that comes to the county as a political subdivision of the state. So we'll have some of those state funds to allocate, and the priorities that you set through the plan will help guide that process as well. As a process, as I said, we work with the community health improvement plan. So the committee looked at data that was part of the CHIP in setting that baseline in terms of quantitative data and needs, and then followed that up with a lot of qualitative data. We probably met with more than 200 people in a combination of focus groups and interview process to get a clear sense of what the needs were across the county, again, across the age spectrum, and really paying attention to rural-urban issues as well as specific communities within Lane County in identifying appropriately the needs and what the priority strategies would be for moving forward. There is significant data in the plan itself, and we haven't done slides on that data in the interest of time, but I would let the community know that that is posted online and is easily accessible in that way. And again, our hope in this plan was that we pulled together that information that's, again, not only useful for us as the county, but also for all of our community partners who are preparing grant proposals and might otherwise find that data useful in characterizing the need and priorities in our community. So the full report is available online to the community. So with that, I think I'm going to toss it over to Pauline to walk through the 11 recommendations that are part of our report.
So the slide doesn't have the 11 recommendations.
And that's on me. I missed
Karen. But I'll review all the 11 recommendations. So this is primarily identifying the gaps in the system, like Michelle said. So this is not going to be new for a lot of you. It's a lot of the challenges that have been brought to your attention on what the needs are that we continue to see in the service delivery. So the first recommendation is continuing to the plan to more effectively serve the needs of people with co-occurring disorders, primarily mental health, addictions, and also including physical challenges and developmental disabilities. The other gap that is identified in the system is a lack of residential crisis respite for youth. They seem to be a lot, what we are seeing in the system now is a lot of homeless youth, youth that are couch surfing or sleeping in their cars. And oftentimes that's the biggest challenge to identify them because they don't typically come in for services. So it's having a crisis place where they can come for services, so they're connected with other service providers. This one is not new. It's a crisis respite center for adults. That's a big gap in our system. The other one is providing services, appropriate services in the rural communities, beginning with crisis services in coastal communities. There has been, I believe, in the works, and we're going to be looking at a pilot project in Florence for a mobile crisis, and with the hope that some of those services continue in other rural Oregon. The other gap is housing. That's a big one for our community, and especially for folks who are who have challenges with addiction and mental health issues. And the other one is prevention services, a comprehensive approach to prevention, identification, and assessment in K through 12 schools. And the other one is a way of incentivizing providers to treat the older adult population, which seems to be not getting a lot of the services that they need. And then developing a plan for creating a performance measurement system that tracks outcomes for the mental health and addiction client population. There seem to be a lot of silos that we don't have a concerted effort to track all the services that are being provided. And then involving the CCOs to implement payment models that support these recommendations. Then the last two, the surprise ones is integrating evidence-based prevention strategies in rural and non-traditional settings. And lastly is increased prevention, outreach, access, and services to people of color, non-English speakers, and the LGBTQ+ communities.
So with that, I would say again on page 47 of the completed plan that's posted online, all 11 of these policy and program recommendations are listed if the community would like to review those. And I would say, as Pauline did, many of these will not be a surprise to the board. We've talked about the need to address permanent supportive housing issues, the significant lack of crisis services, particularly for adults who are addicted and have mental health concerns. I know earlier this morning, a number of the commissioners were talking about the Seattle is Dying video that's circulating right now. So it certainly calls those issues up that we know we need to address in our community and surfaced as priorities through our planning process and will help direct our efforts moving forward in the next year. So I think we will stop there to give you plenty of time to guide the conversation, and we're happy to talk about any aspects of this plan that are of interest to the board.
Okay, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Down the line here.
I'd like to thank the board for trusting me and allowing me to be the liaison to the MHAC I'm in my 7th year now, which seems like that has shot by, doesn't it, since I first met you, Michelle. And not much to say about it. A great report. You have 11 recommendations. There are a couple on there that really jump out as real game changers, I believe. And if you go back 2 slides to 1, 2, and 3, we look at the number 1 item there, people with co-occurring disorders, dual multiple diagnoses. Our health centers really provide us an opportunity to do that, and we have 6 community federally qualified health centers that really allow us, more than many other counties and jurisdictions, to be able to do exactly number 1. But I want to jump down to number 2 and number 3. I think these can be potentially game changers. And they are both items that we've been talking about extensively, with some results and some anticipation, some hopes and aspirations. On number 2, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, I know we do have a place identified potentially that could provide a residential crisis respite center for youth, and that we potentially have a work in progress on that. Can you take a moment to talk about that?
Yes, Chair Sorensen, Commissioner Farr, I think there are actually a couple different strategies that could help meet this particular priority. One certainly is to have a assessment and referral center for youth, which I think is what you're referencing as one of the concepts that the county might be able to host in our currently empty pod out at Youth Services and provide some space for that service. So there certainly is interest and activity in the community to address those needs. I know also Looking Glass has recently opened an additional residential treatment program. So I think there's not going to be a single solution on that front. The other piece that I would lift up under this priority is the problem we've heard about, and I know the board has tracked on as well, of young people essentially being boarded at the emergency department. And so for those kids who typically it's a mental health issue, oftentimes it can have a co-occurring developmental disabilities diagnosis, but those children are very hard to place. And that's a situation not only in Lane County, statewide, that's been a significant issue, and I know that there are bills pending in the legislature to work specifically with DHS to create some solutions around that. There's significant interest from Peace Health to work with the county to find a solution to address the needs of those children who luckily, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, kids can spend weeks, even up to a month, in the emergency department, and that's just not an appropriate place for kids who need treatment. So, so I think all of those specific strategies would come under this particular priority of addressing crisis services for kids.
A broad-based approach, including beds.
Absolutely.
To replace beds in the emergency room, or replace, in some cases, couches, as you mentioned, Pauline. This number 3, without beating that any further, I think we're moving rapidly in that area. I'm satisfied personally with that, the motion there. The third, however, is something that we're talking about and we keep talking about. We have a 23-hour crisis center, our Hourglass, which does a great job, but it says after, they don't get to spend the night, that's why it's 23 hours. So we need something that will displace perhaps our 360 population that's being sent to the state facilities, or people who are being sent directly to go directly to jail, do not pass a crisis center, do not, so it's so we don't have anything. And we talk about it pretty regularly, and in the mental health summit I hear law enforcement people and judicial people and administrative people and practitioners all talking in the same language, that we need a place where we can take people instead of jail to identify services that they need and keep them in a residential situation, supported in the services that they need. I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to put out a plea that we're going through a budget process right now, and potentially we can identify some support for this and encourage. It's not going to. Lane County cannot pay for this by itself. By any stretch of the imagination, it's going to have to be a team effort, not unlike the MLK project that we have going on right now, where we reach out into to providers, to other agencies, to the private sector, for instance, to find ways to fund the crisis center, not unlike the one that's in Marion County, or I believe there's one in Jackson County that's maybe not quite as effective as Marion County, a little bit different. So could you talk about the crisis respite center ever so briefly, because everybody else wants to ask you questions, but to me these are the two hot items that can provide some pretty substantial results.
Start on that, and then I can.
So the crisis center, if we were to borrow the model that Marion County has, is a place where when somebody is picked up by law enforcement for low-level of offenses like trespassing, public intoxication, those minor infractions, they would be enticed to go into this place, the crisis place, and they would have an assessment and a way to engage them in services. They also have a component within their structure where they have a DA embedded in their staff who advocates for not charging those people with crimes, but instead of being charged and going to jail, that they go to the crisis center instead and are engaged in services that way. So the path that we are taking here is usually they're charged and then they go into the state hospital and the process kind of repeats itself. So they've kind of identified a way to stop that process before it begins. So they're not charged, or they are, instead of going to jail, they go to the crisis center for services. Did I miss anything?
No, I think, in particular, I would lift up that the place is one piece of the solution, and then there's this larger system engagement with all of our public safety and behavioral health partners to be able to come out of this process with a truly robust crisis system that works together. So certainly Hourglass and that 23-hour assessment process is an important place, and they're serving a lot of people right now. And we need that next step in the process for people who maybe need 5 or 7 days of respite to be able to stabilize and move into services, and as Pauline said, really engage in that treatment process. We've been working with Peace Health, and hopeful that within the next couple months, they will be able to open 5 beds that will help with that system. It's not sufficient, but it's a next step. And then as part of the priority in the mental health and addictions plan, as a community, as you said, not just the county, but as a community, really working together to move that forward.
And it's particularly impressive to hear law enforcement people speaking the same language, the exact same language that you speak over at LCBH on this. Very quickly, I know that when we send people to the state hospital, they don't get assessed for treatment, they get assessed for trial. What they really are assessing people to see if they're fit to go to trial. So thank you very much for that in-depth. You could go on for hours about it, and I'm going to talk about it until we have bricks and mortar in place. I fix on bricks and mortar. You always ground me and say it's a whole system that we're looking at here. But bricks and mortar are an integral part of it. And the last thing I'll say is thank you for paying attention to the needs in Florence in particular to provide mental health service, regular mental health services in Florence. I'm looking forward to further discussion on that. Thank you.
I'm very supportive of your recommendations. I'm particularly pleased to see in their outreach to the rural communities. It's really important to me, and my district is largely rural. And I think we're finally getting past the conversation where people originally may have thought that those folks need to go to the city to get services, and we know that's not realistic. It's not morally something that I would want to see happen either, and many others. We really need to be able to serve people in the communities in which they live. So thank you for including that, and I'll be watching, how this all unfolds.
I was just curious about the recommendation about getting paid sooner. Was it something to do with?
One that talks.
Yeah, there it is.
Model, the number 9.
Encourage payment models that support these recommendations.
So that recommendation in particular looks at our treatment services. Those are largely paid through the coordinated care organization. So finding ways, it's not necessarily about being paid sooner, but looking at how those payment models are structured so that they support what I would call value-based payment. So our current system has been a fee-for-service-based system.
You don't want that.
Well, I think that the state doesn't want that. We want to have a way, rather than just paying for quantity, that we make sure there's sufficient access to services and that we're incentivizing outcomes and high quality.
Does this sentence communicate something to the state?
I believe that does.
Okay.
And I would say it also communicates something to the Coordinated Care Organization, which
Okay.
might be particularly relevant as well.
Right, but this is just our approval of the plan to submit to the state. This isn't something we're submitting to a CCO.
Well, the plans are developed in collaboration with coordinated care organizations and public safety coordinating councils. So the Community Advisory Council at Trillium has been involved in helping shape this plan, and that, yes, we absolutely would circle this back to the Trillium Board and whoever might be a CCO in the next 2 years in this community.
Okay.
I read here either we approve this or we don't get $30 million. Is that correct?
No, I would say there's an in-between where
I'm looking
you could-
literally at the two alternatives.
Yes, so what probably should have been listed there was you absolutely can amend this, you can send it back to the committee if there are revisions, things that you thought we missed. Ultimately, the board does need to adopt a plan, but you don't have to adopt this as written if you have changes you'd like to see.
I don't intend to not, but I would like to know what time frame do you need a plan approved by to make all of the timeframes you discussed, including those of other CBOs that will be writing grants that need to leverage this to bring more resources for this topic to our communities.
Thank you, I appreciate the question. I would say we are bringing this to you now in hopes that we can move forward with a contracting process with the state funds that will be coming to us in July. So on our typical calendar in the spring, we would begin to release requests for proposals for the funds that we have. So again, there's some time if there's something you want to send back for revision, but we would intend to hold off on releasing RFPs for our funds until we're
Sooner
clear
the
on the
better.
priorities from the board. Yes.
Okay. On the one hand, it seems crazy that I will only speak for myself, could have substantive input on a $30 million plan at this high level. Nonetheless, question, and that is, I remember when, as a brand-new commissioner, the TAC report had to be approved, and I had some issues about the difference in reporting from the people that did that report and the school districts reporting homeless youth. The school and I noticed I think one of the things that you mentioned was a consistent methodology about something in the K-12 schools. How do you impose that on schools when it doesn't feel, and do you in fact utilize the infrastructure they already have identifying young people that are homeless in this plan?
So I'll start with that, and then if anyone else wants to chime in, I would say we don't impose anything on the schools, but we absolutely do partner with them on issues where there is overlap. And I will tell you, I'm hearing from school districts across the county that mental health issues are critically important to them right now. So I would anticipate significant partnerships with the school districts moving forward in the next 2 years. We do currently provide programming inside the schools. Sometimes that's in a school-based health center setting. Sometimes it's a prevention program in the classroom, but we do collaborate in those ways. In terms of the specific counts around homeless youth, I would say yes, we do incorporate that data as our mental health system. This isn't governed by the same HUD rules that have that specific definition around homelessness. We're more looking at the mental health and addiction needs of kids, and so that specific definition isn't as critical for us as we look at what are the risks and challenges that are presented to kids when they don't have a place to sleep at night.
And I'm hoping what you're saying is that they're not as critical to you as it relates to funding for specific populations, but they're absolutely as critical to you.
Yes.
Okay, I know, I'm just, and a quick comment, and that is, it's so sad to me. This is the second time this morning we've heard of a program that essentially is trying to figure out ways to provide services in schools, driver's ed being the other, that we're just a part of the schools when many of us were going to school. School nurses, school health centers, driver's ed. I mean, it's just, it's, I don't know, that's my statement, it's sad. And my last question is, and there's a naivete in this question, because I hear a lot of times people discuss beds. And my question is, as a result of the work of this plan, not the plan, but the work, what happens, how many additional bedrooms will there be for young people in Lane County?
That's a great question, and the planning team didn't really spell that out. I think that's part of the implementation work that needs to come as the next step as we tease out some of these specific priorities and operationalize those.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner?
Thank you. So one of the really great things the Affordable Care Act did was establish parity between physical and mental health in our Medicaid system. And you know, Michelle, I'm sure you're really aware of the change it made for our Public Safety Coordinating Council's budget, where we used to pay for emergence addiction treatment from our public safety budget to where we now bill Medicaid for that. And so my question on number 7, you know, that you had up there a second ago, is that sounds like if there's an issue with Medicare payments for mental health and addiction, is that an issue we need to take up with our federal delegation and look for federal legislation to correct that and get it to be a system that's similar to our Medicaid system? Is that where the real issue is, not trying to incentivize people to treat those folks basically for free or something like that? We just really need Medicare to recognize those diagnoses as billable issues. Is that too simple of a statement?
I'm pausing to see if someone else wanted to chime in first. I don't think that's too simple of a statement. I think that yes, that's an important piece. I do also think that there are elements around expanding the number of providers who accept Medicare that makes a significant difference in communities. And so that's a helpful thing. And then to come up with some other ways that we cover those payments. It's interesting here in our community, we have an older adult mental health initiative that actually our staff in Lane County were doing such a great job. The state asked us to also take over Coos and Curry County and provide the same program in those coastal counties to really look at the unique issues around the older adult population. So some of it is financial payment issues. Some of it is being able to have providers better equipped to recognize addiction and mental health concerns in that population where they might present differently than they present in other populations. So I think there are other elements to that, but yes, your piece is also true.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues about providers accepting Medicare patients is the reimbursement schedule is just insanely low, but so there's no real incentive for providers. So yeah, I see us having some maybe work as a board, as a legislative priority, maybe to try and work that issue a little bit, at least for our local delegation, because I truly think, establishing parity between mental and physical health, there's been so much tied between those two, and just the whole issues of stress and anxiety and impacting physical health, just goes round in circles between the two, and you have to deal with them together and equally. And that was one of the great things the Affordable Care Act did, was establish that parity. I want to get back to, you mentioned Seattle is dying, and it sits in my mind after watching it. It's hard to get some of the imagery out of your mind after watching that hour. It's worth an hour of anybody's time to watch. Which gets to some of the issues, that I'm kind of wondering how we're attacking in some ways with the homeless population, particularly that has, addiction issues, may have mental health issues, but getting them to accept treatment it seemed to be one of the recurring themes, and in that video was, these folks were in full-blown addiction, knew they were in full-blown addiction, but had no desire to get into treatment at all because there was nothing, really getting them that way. They were willing to accept living rough in a tent or on a sidewalk, just to continue that addiction because it was driving them so hard. And one of the things they showed towards the end was these programs where when somebody's held responsible for some of their behaviors through the criminal system, where the threat of prison is hanging over them, then they'll move into treatment and then ultimately can get maybe moved through the system into supportive housing after they get through the treatment and all that, and how that was working well in Rhode Island. Are you all seeing similar things where we're just kind of making it easy for people to live rough and stay addicted? Where do we balance that? As I think about our Stepping Up initiative, I love the respite centers and the mobile crisis center because it fits into our Stepping Up initiative of trying to divert people that have mental health issues out of our criminal justice system. But then again, the criminal justice system tends to be the one stick we have sometimes to get these people to accept treatment. How do you balance that? That was the real, as I walk away from that video and all that, that's kind of where I kind of got struck by is maybe some of what we're trying to be compassionate with non-enforcement of laws is actually not truly compassionate, in dealing with these folks that are addicted. So, how does that fit into this plan, and how do we deal with that?
Well, and I want to turn to the two people at the table who are probably better qualified to talk about engagement than I am, and then we'll make sure that we also talk about MAT in the correction system too. But
I think that's always a struggle because we often have a challenge with people's rights too. So as long as they are not, presenting as a danger, they have a right to be homeless sometimes. And what the plan is targeting as far as that goes is the prevention and outreach. So we are talking about going to where these folks are and building the relationships, building the rapport to be able to really entice them into treatment. So it takes a lot of that concerted effort to really build that relationship with them, to see the need or to identify the advantage of coming to us for treatment. So that's what I see as far as this plan is the targeted prevention outreach services before it really becomes a crisis. And I think the plan addresses a lot of the preventative outreach services. And I think that would be the only way to kind of combat that issue of engagement.
And I see it from the other end. I see people who are in treatment who cannot find housing, that there isn't housing available. And then that's very frustrating for us because we have a person who wants to be well, who wants to get better, but is living on the street and there's nothing available. We cannot find anything available for them. So it works in the other direction as well. And I think that's a piece that we have to remember. I think the criminal justice system can help. It doesn't always help, though. And so it has to be a balance there. And so for the people who are in treatment, who want to get well, where do we put them? Because if they're on the street, that's not going to support them in the recovery.
Well, hopefully the 91 units of supportive housing that we stimulated with our housing improvement program and our $2 million in grants will help with some of that as that gets under constructed. And as we look at other options, but it does seem that, our treatment courts, like Veterans Court, seem to be working well. But yes, there is this issue of getting folks housing. Sponsors has been a great agency helping with a lot of that post-conviction housing. But, there's need now if we try and intervene and get people prior to criminal justice system, then they're not really eligible for sponsors. So we need other housing. So, we need to keep working towards those, 600 targeted supportive housing units that we have in our poverty and homelessness strategic plan, and even repeated that the 350, the TAC plan is recommending at a minimum. So we're kind of chipping away at it. We got 91 in the pipeline right now that we're helping incentivize here with funds from Lane County. And I think there's much more on the drawing board. So I get the housing issue. It's a big issue. And just
Mr.
more units of all housing we can put on the street is better.
Absolutely. And Commissioner Bozievich, Chair Sorensen, I would add a key part of this plan is really focusing on our evidence-based strategies. So I would say both ends of that continuum, when Pauline talks about the outreach, we know from our FUSE project that works, to go out, find those people who are at the highest need and really do intensive outreach and engagement services with them, provide housing. We know that makes a difference. And we also know that medication-assisted treatment absolutely works. And so we are expanding that in an outpatient way in the services that we provide in Health and Human Services. There's a new clinic that's opened in Springfield in the last year that helps provide access. So that work on an outpatient basis, and we're working with the jail staff to really increase the availability of medication-assisted treatment in our jail. So I think, again, individual people have different needs, and so we need a constellation of interventions.
I just wish there was MAT for meth.
Me too.
It's great.
I said that to someone this weekend.
It's great for opioids, but there's not a drug yet for meth, so I'm hoping the researchers find that soon. But yeah, and I also know from Facilities Committee yesterday that you guys got some federal money to expand our methadone clinic there at Charlton. So we're going to be doing some rework of the first floor for that. So
Absolutely.
Yes.
Our goal is to eliminate those wait lists so that when people are ready for treatment, we have a place for them.
And I think one of the things that's happening very quickly in society is the stigma of MAT is going away. You know, it used to be if you knew somebody was going to get methadone, that was, you know, you kind of, oh, you were a heroin addict, you know, or something. Now people understand that it's so easy to end up hooked on opioids just from a minor knee injury or something like that, that stigma to having to get medically assisted treatment to get off of those is going away, hopefully, with society. So, you know, that's, and the whole stigma around mental health issues in general. More and more as people understand it, I think that, you know, we'll get there to where people are willing to talk about it openly. Us guys stop having increasing incidents of suicide as we grow older because we start talking about it. Yeah.
Or we filtered through.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, we need, you know, it's you know, it's those things, you know, that whole, and that's part of the whole prevention strategies too. It's just removing those stigmas, and I think gradually we're getting there. You know, when I can be excited about that we're expanding a methadone clinic, you know, yeah, that would have been, you know, 20 years ago, I can't imagine that would have been in my mind that I'd be excited about that, you know, because I had a negative connotation to methadone, you know, so it's changing. The world's changing.
So I take that as a motion to approve the order as presented?
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved by Commissioner Bozievich and seconded by Commissioner Burney to approve Order 1904-02-06. Further discussion by commissioners? Seeing none? Oh, go for it.
I would just like to take this opportunity, on the one hand, to thank you, but I think you all represent some of the higher-paid professionals attacking this issue. So I would also like to thank all of those people in nonprofits, in community settings that don't get paid a dime, but are mentoring young people in their communities, are providing latchkey kids with a place to go while parents are gone, that are feeding hungry people. You know, as we are trying to re-stitch the fabric of our society, I just want to thank everyone, including you all, for this effort.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries
Aye, by the
5-0. Motion's adopted. Thank you very much for all your great work, and as Commissioner Burney mentioned, to all the many other people who were involved in this process and all the good they're doing. Thank you. We want to take up item 8B, our approval of the Lane County Board of Commissioners letter to the Oregon Health Authority in support of a single coordinated care organization in Lane County. And I just want to say the reason I voted against putting this on, in the form it's in currently, is that it didn't address the main issue for me of whether or not we were going to have a nonprofit coordinated care organization. And that issue was raised in the public comment today by Mr. Dickinson's letter, in which he pointed out that, that their group, which is only one of the many, organizations that provides important social services and mental health services in the county, but this is a big statewide issue. And I know that efforts to bar private corporations from being CCOs has not passed, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't respond to the legitimate concerns of nonprofit providers that, are continually raising the issue that the profit providers are getting in on this money, and it's over $112 million, if I remember your email to the board. It's over $112 million that flows into the
I think that was a quarter.
per quarter. Okay, so almost $500 million then, per year, or more than $500 million. So I kind of like.
Chair,
yeah.
before the discussion progresses further, I need to declare a conflict of interest.
Okay.
My wife works for our CCO, has since before I was became a county commissioner. And while typically discussions surrounding the CCO do not involve recommendations to the state as to how the CCO is going to be operated, this one does. And as you continue your conversation about it, I am going to recuse from the conversation.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I forgot that. In their letter, they say, furthermore, we feel that a for-profit model for CCOs is less aligned with South Lane mental health philosophy for client care, where we strive to provide the best possible community-based care and to serve clients. As an agency serving rural communities, we realize that we need to meet clients where they are, and that it's not always the cheapest or most convenient model to develop. Now, I have no problem with the way the letter's drafted as far as we need one CCO. I really don't. My big thing was about just emphasizing that, well, we're going to let this go, and we're going to tell the health authority, oh, well, we like this method. Well, I don't like this method. I think we should get on board with Representative Greenlick and the efforts that he's made to point out that nonprofits will be better served to be a coordinated care organization. But I'll leave that, my comments, and commissioners, of course, will come to a decision about sending the letter. So is there a motion to approve the letter with the change I'm suggesting, or a motion to approve the letter without the change I'm suggesting?
I have a question.
Yep.
Since I was not here the last time we did this, what are the pros and cons of adding language that the chair has suggested?
Commissioner Buck and Chair Sorensen, sorry I didn't, if I'd known we were going to have this conversation, I probably would have booked more time on your agenda and brought with me some of the materials that, as Commissioner Sorensen said, the state legislature wrestled with this issue at least twice, maybe 3 times, about whether or not to change that requirement for CCOs in Oregon and opted not to do that. So I think there are a list of pros and cons that the legislature considered, and I certainly can get those to you. For a practical, where we are in their procurement process at this point for Lane County, I think we did mention this at the work session in February. There are four entities who have expressed a desire to apply to serve Lane County. And in terms of their corporate structures, one of them is a taxable not-for-profit, two are for-profits, and one is an LLC. So that's kind of how it played out with who applied in Lane County. So all of them are taxable. I guess in terms of pros and cons of inserting it into your letter at this point, it certainly would imply that the commissioners are backing one particular CCO. While none of them are pure nonprofits, there's, one that's a taxable not-for-profit. And so I guess I would caution some about picking a particular provider without looking at the whole package that each of them offer, and just using this one standard, I would say, could be the con in terms of inserting that, is that you don't have that larger analysis on it. At this point, I don't think that the state will say, oh, Lane County has said pick a nonprofit, so that's what we're going to do, given the fact that the legislature has wrestled with that issue and the state has decided not to make that a requirement for applicants. But that's off the top of my head what I kind of see as pros and cons.
Okay, Joe?
Oh, no, go ahead first, Jay.
No, go ahead, Joe.
I'm going to vote for sending a letter, but I would like to state, for the record, that I don't think that I agree with Chair Sorensen's concerns. I don't see its place in this letter. I also am not convinced that having one CCO, even though I'm going for this letter, is necessarily better than having competing agencies in that regard, frankly. I'm not convinced of that at all. But nonetheless, we've had discussions, and I will end up supporting this. And I'm not convinced that this letter is going to define what the state does.
Okay, Jay?
Thank you. I'll also echo Commissioner Burney that I don't believe the issue of nonprofit versus for-profit needs to be part of this letter. That's not what this issue is about, and particularly seeing there hasn't been legislative direction, that's a criteria the state can't really utilize. So expressing a preference one way or the other, they can't utilize that in making their decision. I do think it will be an improvement on our system to have a single provider versus multiple providers. There's just, as you guys outlined in your presentation before, there could be all sorts of issues involved in having multiple agencies cover Lane County. So I do support the letter as written, and as such, I will move to approve the letter as written.
Okay, it's been moved to approve the letter as written. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bozievich, second by Commissioner Buck to approve the letter as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The vote is 3-2, so the letter will be sent. 3-1. Thank you. Commissioner Sorensen voting no. Commissioner Farr excused.
Recused.
And recused, right. Okay, and we have just a few minutes left. Maybe out of concern to make sure we stay on our schedule, we can recess until 1:30 and take up the remainder of our agenda, including our executive session after the work session at 1:30. Okay? Sound good? All right, very good. So we're in the recess till 1:30. We'll be back here in Harris Hall at